Greetings gamers and welcome to the 44th live stream from the MisfitGamersStudios. I am your host Vortex and this is D&D Discussions. On today's episode I have KAge coming in remotely to join me with our topic today, which is going to be more engaging combat. This topic is basically something that we've been wanting to discuss for a couple weeks now, but just haven't really had the mindset to do it. But tonight we are going to kind of break down some of our techniques and some of the things that we've done in the past to help create combat that is, I don't want to just say more engaging, but essentially combat that allows for more player agency and allows for more dynamic situations instead of just the tried and true method of springing in an encounter or just having a planned encounter in your gaming session. These are some of the techniques that we're going to go over that allow us to make it feel a little bit more dynamic, a little bit more engaged with the player out, instead of just the straight, I'm doing this attack, I'm doing this roll, here's my damage. These are ways that you can make it feel a lot more alive and a lot more like the player is actually in control instead of them just reacting to you having a combat session. Hey Cosmic, great to see you in chat. Thank you so much for joining. So without further any delay, I'm going to go ahead and unmute KAge, get him in here. And we are going to start our discussion about this because I have a couple I have three main points that I want to bring to the table. And then we'll just kind of branch off like we normally do. KAge, welcome. Welcome. This is your first time calling in, I believe.
Actually second, but it is still very cool.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, no.
Very cool.
You just had a different
like this,
view.
Exactly.
You have a lot more stable camera
it's a good
this
deal.
time.
Yes, I know. I've got my desk set up instead of a nice little fold-out table chair thing, so it's looking a little bit better. Whatever,
Nice.
it's fine. But no, I'm excited. I'm definitely excited for this topic too, because it's something that I feel like as a DM I struggle with sometimes is like how do I present this to my players? Like I always want to make it available, but it's hard to make it feel like it's there, right? Because half the time if I like want to start combat, but I also want them to feel like they have an opportunity to know what's happening ahead of time, potentially do something about it, potentially set a plan or a trap or whatever. Like, what does that actually look like in practice? So, yeah, I'm excited to see if we can come up with some ideas to bring that to life. For sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And these are some of the ideas I've tried both in Discord. I think a couple of these, you'll recognize at least in some part or in spirit from things that you've experienced yourself. But I also want to cover briefly right up front, some of the things that we've talked about before. Cosmic said he has a hard day. It's a COVID vaccination booster plus a flu shot plus going to work. Yay! Those are great days. But yeah, so when it comes to like creating engaging combat, I totally understand what you're saying about like how do you present it? How do you give players more than just their roles and their attacks? And we've talked before and given some examples of what you can do or what I've experienced, from my players, like players completely ending combat within the first round, not by winning, but by turning the combat into a negotiation or essentially a hostage situation. That's, one direction that you can take to allow players to do more. We've talked a lot about, or not talked a lot about, we've mentioned things like, even adding some dialogue into combat and not just, like the shit talking and just not just the, poking fun at people and getting under their skin, but dialogue as in being able to change and persuade people, having a morale system we've mentioned before about how to like balance out an encounter to where, I'll take into account if the leader goes down, that will affect the rest of the team and based off of preset notions that I've built that encounter with, right? I'll say that this party is here this encounter is designed because these guys are coming after the party for these reasons. These are their motivations and these are their situations, right? I'll set a hierarchy of all of the minions, basically from anywhere from the most loyal to the one that's just getting there for cash, or it's just a job or doesn't really understand what he's doing, right? And all of that will be kind of pre-decided for me, so I can kind of make a balanced morale system of that party, or of that, of the enemy party. So things that happen in the combat can change that. So those are things that you can do directly to combat, right? And we've talked about some other options of player agency, letting them do feats that don't really exist, or if it's a one-time deal, letting them roll for it, letting them go outside of their bounds. We've mentioned, alternating how roles work. So I've, talked a couple times about how I do, my attack rolls, right? So or my skill check rolls, where it's like you want to get closest to without going over, which is the more traditional second edition standard where you need to roll under your number. But I apply not necessarily modifiers, but I do apply a range of outcomes that, although they're all successful, based on how low you do roll, the outcome will not necessarily turn out ideal exactly how you wanted, versus it's going to turn out perfectly, maybe even more into your advantage. So those are all things that I think, we've mentioned over time that can be applied directly in those combat, right? But today I want to branch into what can you do, not just in combat, like once the encounter started, but before, during, and after encounters. And I say that specifically because I know it sounds like I'm repeating myself, but the difference between something that's being done in combat, right? Like in combat, meaning it's in someone's initiative and they're asking a question like, hey, can I do this? And you're like, that sounds cool, roll for it. That is an in combat in the moment. What I'm talking about, the
kind of like what
during,
Cosmic was
after,
trying to set up with his dragon encounter.
Yes. But yeah, before, during, and after an encounter, meaning not something specifically in combat, but something that can be done for the encounter's purpose. So we'll get into some of those details, but I wanted to make that right up front, because I'm trying to use those terms specifically differently, right? In combat versus in the encounter. But yeah, so the first thing that I wanted to talk about was pre-planning. So this would be, before encounters, right? And this is a technique I think that I've seen used a couple times, and I don't want to say I think it's underutilized, but I don't think it's completely unknown. I just think that it is not the first idea most people will have for encounters. But my idea, I kind of have two of them. And my idea for something that is allowing for pre-planning of an encounter for the players, something that the players don't really ever get to do, right? Most of the time, they're leveling up, they're building their character for their character's build sake, right? The weapons they choose, the armor they choose are all for the build of the character and of the party, but not always for the specific encounter. So one thing that's kind of nice that I think that I'd like to give my players is the opportunity to be in control of the encounter before it starts. And what I mean by that is, normally they're going into someone's territory, they're being ambushed, they're, startling an animal, or, they're provoking, right? They're usually not in control of the encounter. They're usually reacting to people, to the NPCs starting the encounter. So two of my favorite ideas for pre-planning and pre-encounter engagement is allowing the players to set up either an ambush for a known oncoming NPC, or if they're if they're all rogues or something, but allowing them to either set up an ambush for what they know is coming, or allowing them to do an opportunity to play almost a mini game, if you want to call it that, of fortification. Essentially, hey, people are on their way, where they're traveling, so you can either let them set up an ambush for, let's say they want to steal something, or hey, a big army's coming and they're coming for you guys, but there's a town nearby that you think that you can fortify. What do? You have 3 days to do it. You make them do rolls. You make them use certain resources, and you can even, stack resources in certain limits and say,
is this something you present to the players?
Yes. So so the idea would be you could present it to them as a pre-done encounter, right? If you're the DM who pre-plans your encounters. But this is just another opportunity to also suggest or get the players involved in, or if they ask for it, right? Because the idea of the pre-planning,
I think that's where I struggle, is how do I get them to think of stuff like this, or even want stuff like this? Because I think people do get stuck in the mindset of it's just attack and go, and
So
react.
so that's where what I like to do is, if I'm not going to give them like, if it's a brand new player set, I as a DM may give them more direct clues. Like, you could say, hey, you know that the thing that you want, you know where it is, but recently you've learned that it's going to be transported with minimal guards compared to where it currently is, and you know where it's going has even more guards. So you know you're filtering it in, right? You're basically saying it's going to be too late.
Right.
It's not perfect, but hey, on the way it's fine. So you're setting it up, and they may just be like, "Oh, cool, we can go straight attack it." And you're like, you could definitely straight attack it. You do know the path it's going to take is going to go next to a ravine. They have to cross water. There's a couple farm towns. Like, you could basically give them every reason to believe that directly attacking it isn't a good idea. Or you can give them every reason to understand that there are opportunities, right? Like, hey, there's a rickety bridge they have to cross. It's like, oh, okay, so we can attack it there. And be like, yeah, that rickety bridge, like, it probably will barely hold just the cart itself. So they're probably going to take a long time to get it across, because they're probably going to have to decouple the horses, move the horses across, then tie a rope to it, bring the... You could basically give them enough detail to make them realize there's an opportunity to go somewhere. If you don't want to be the DM that says, hey, you know, you're tasked to ambush this, or hey, you could give them, you say, hey, they're going to leave here. You know when they're going to leave. You know where they're going. You can directly attack them now. You could wait till they're on the road and attack them. You know there's at least 3 locations you can set up an ambush. Or you could, you know, let them get to the end city and then find out where it goes from there. So you could even add it into a variety of lists. Or if you don't want to be that, again, another idea, give it through an NPC. Let an NPC talk to them about, like, hey, what's going on, guys? What are you guys doing?
Yes.
If they're in a tavern and someone just goes, hey, so it's like, you guys look kind of bummed, like, yeah, we're just trying to get this thing. And, you know, it's like, you know, so just start up a conversation. Then you can just have a drunk that happens to be overhearing be like, yeah, you know what you should do? Like, there's a place that they'll, you know, like, you could always provide that idea directly or indirectly. But what I like to do is give the, you know me, I like to give the option, not the like, I don't want to say, hey, you're going to set up an ambush, unless that's like the mission someone's buying them. Yeah. If someone's like paying them, like, hey, I need you to set up an ambush, that's one thing. And that could be it too. You could just say, hey, you are paid to help set up an ambush, or make them come across some people. Like, they're on their way to steal something that they know is in transit, and you come across some other people setting up an ambush that is, like, obviously fucking terrible. So they have the choice to just, like, let them go, or be like, oh, wait a second. No. What you should do. And then guess what? Now they're setting up an ambush they didn't know they wanted to set up. And the same thing with the fortification. Right? That one's a little bit easier, where it's like, hey, you know these people are coming, and there's probably a lot of them. They're about 2 days away. You could meet them in the middle of this field one day out, but you also know that there's that farmhouse that had that, you know, like, all of the cattle cages around, that basically kind of, like, you know, makes it a little bit more defendable. You could go over there, right? So that fortification opportunity of, like, saying, hey, you have enough wood to fortify 3 of the 4 sides of the house. You have enough, you know, with this to stay here. You know, you have enough food for this many days. You could basically stack it to where it's like, how do you use the resources you have to fortify this location? And you would basically kind of, like, as a DM, what you could do is pre-write what your actions are. Because there's a really old mechanic. I don't even know if current D&D has this, but there's an amazing, way overcomplicated, but actually a pretty brilliant mechanic for large-scale combat. Like, when you're, as a player, like a general, and instead of, like, being on the battlefield doing combat, there's actually combat rules that detail out how to deal with, like, mass movements.
I swear I've heard of these before.
And it's pretty cool, because in a nutshell, what it really is both sides will basically decide a list of options, right? You basically have a list of, like, essentially formations and directions you can go. And each side will pick, the defending side and the attacking side will pick their choices, kind of like almost like Rochambeau, but secretly. Once it's revealed, then you read out what those actions do, and each one basically has an outcome depending on what it's faced with, right? So you could use one that
I
flanks the
like that.
enemy, and they could use one that flanks you, and those can cancel each other out because you're flanking people basically like met. Or you could have one that says goes to the left, and they say they go to the right, um, and you end up going to the same part of the map, so you stalemate. But if you end up going this way, you could skirt by them, or you attack them with you decide, hey, we're actually going to approach with cavalry, but they said, hey, we're going to defend with arrows, and then there's a whole breakdown of like they're defending with archers, this is cavalry, what happens. So kind of applying that same thing, you could approach a fortification of like, okay, so when the enemy gets here, there's going to be this many, and if they choose to fortify, these are the steps that these guys are going to take. They're going to come in from their west. Half of them will come from the west. A quarter of them will come from the south, and a quarter of them will stay behind as like a second wave. And you could just pre-plan that. So you write all that down, and then you tell them how are you going to fortify. So if they don't fortify the west, you already have it written down. So you're not specifically targeting their weaknesses.
Right.
You just have a set of, hey guys, I've already planned out. The enemy knows what they're going to do. It is written right here. You don't see it, but it's written right here. The enemy is going to follow this plan.
Mhm.
What are you guys going to plan for? And when, once you're done, we'll read out what
I
the enemy
do
does.
definitely like setting up that type of gameplay. I do feel like that kind of stuff might be appropriate to have some sort of like, all right, guys, this is how this combat is going to work, or this encounter is going to work. Like, this is what this looks like. Hey, you guys, your job is to fortify this, and almost presenting to them like it's a new and creative type of encounter. I had a session one time where there was this puzzle, and basically our DM actually had this really cool 3D model that we could like pull in and out, and he basically explained like, hey, this is what this encounter looks like, this is how this encounter works. And basically there were these different like teleporters that you could like jump through, but you could only pull one out while somebody was like on the ground. And there were all different types of like rules, and just it was really engaging and really interesting. And I liked the fact that there was a a different way to do an encounter other than just like, hey, I want
Right.
to smack
And
some stuff.
and you can do
And so
this in
I
a lot
think
of different
that is
ways.
a
You can have
yeah.
like the entire encounter that way, right? Where what you're talking about, where the entire encounter is like you're either going to fend them off or not. But you can also have layers to where that, like, let's say you give them a place to fortify that isn't going to be like impenetrable. You can basically
Hmm.
assign, what you're going to have the enemy do. The more times they get in your way, what you do is you assign every time they get in your way, the enemy the enemy party loses maybe like 5% or 10% of the attacking force. If you come in with like 20 people, every time
Hmm.
the players did something correct, you take away like 3 or 4 of the enemy.
Right.
And so you have like not 5 waves, but you basically have like essentially like 5 actions that the enemy team is going to take to get in. And every time it's thwarted, they just lose people. So where by the time they break in, now it's a battle of, did you decrease the enemy forces enough, right? And if everything, like, let's say goes to shit and they kill nobody, or don't stop any of the enemy, maybe it's a more of like a surrender scene, right? Where yeah, they get in and they capture all of you, and then it's a new, a whole new situation where if you have it to where at least half of the enemy are fought back, then it's an actual encounter, and then you
Hmm.
move forward with real like hand-to-hand combat, because it's allowing, again, the idea
Gotcha.
is not to change the whole combat, but at least my idea was not be to change the entire combat into something else, but to
Very much
add
so.
something where the players felt like they affected combat or they were in control, right? Allowing them to take
And
down the
that's
enemy forces before they go into initiative makes them feel like they controlled the battlefield, right? Or an ambush,
and
being able
that's
to take out
a
and
big
corner
part
and
of
separate enemies better. Because how many
yeah.
times have you had a gaming
That's
session where you walk into a room, the first character to walk into a room starts the initiative and then is immediately surrounded? Why can't you as the player do
that's
that?
uh that's a big part of what I was talking about is so with what we were talking about earlier, again, those types of encounters where you let them know, hey, these are going to be the mechanics of how this is going to work. I think that works well to set that up for them. But I think a little bit of what you were talking about before that, where we give them like options. It's like, hey, this is what's happening in the world, and it's up to you to decide how you actually go about doing things. And I think that's the feeling, that's the player agency, that's the mindset of, hey, this is what I want out of this encounter. This is what I want to feel like I helped contribute to whatever it is that occurred here. I want to feel like what I did made a difference. And I think that that uniqueness of giving that player the opportunity to do something that wouldn't have been done otherwise, that wouldn't have been thought of otherwise, that like, yo, I got to be a part of this solution. I think that's really what creates a lot more engaging uh, uh of the combat. It's like, hey, I get to say I want to do something, and they have those opportunities, like you mentioned earlier, in the midst of combat. But you also have those opportunities if you as a player are thinking ahead, are being like, hey, I've been in a situation similar to this before. We've been ambushed before. We've got caught off guard. We've walked into a room and just fought outright and almost barely survived. But if we were to do X, Y, and Z ahead of time, maybe we could get the upper hand, and maybe we could X, Y, and Z, and just having the ability to see that actually pay off. I think
Mm-hmm.
we were talking similarly about a different topic, just feeling like you've leveled up when you go back to a town where you used to be even with everybody that's in this
Yeah.
town. Now going back after you level up, actually feeling like you're more powerful.
Instead of
Like
going
it's a
back
very
and everybody
similar
leveling up with
concept.
you, and it's like, wait, why did this guy who used to be my
Yes.
bully, who is supposedly like, just some, shopkeeper or some, blacksmith, how is he on my level when I've faced a fucking dragon? You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't make any sense when everything, when the game levels with you. It makes sense when you attract things of higher level, but there are still things that exist that are lower level. And I think that's where that missing part is, right? It feels like every time you level up, it's almost as if the world forgets there are still things less than you.
And not only that, but like that's very true. And like even when it comes to like, hey, if I do well on a perception check, if I'm walking into an area where I'm suspicious or I'm being extra cautious, like I want to feel like that has some sort of value. Like I can actually avoid a potential ambush by seeing it ahead of time and not walking into that room,
Right?
or whatever the case may be, or
That
something like that. You know what I mean?
that brings up another excellent point too, because another thing that I've noticed with gaming sessions and encounter starts is there is the mechanic at the beginning to get like the surprise round on whether or not you get the surprise round, but I think that's so lacking because it makes sense in some and in many situations, but not all situations, right? So like what you're saying is being able to give them a clue or a perception check to pick up on something ahead of schedule, footprints or something looks out of place, so they see that there's an ambush coming, or they see that maybe there are people inside the house they're about to go into that it was supposed to be empty. But normally that only leads to like a surprise round or them not having to roll for surprise because they know it's coming, right? And then the combat just initially starts. But for me, I like to add in those moments where it's like if you see that, it's almost like that. See, for me, that's why I personally, as a DM, hold off. And you've seen this a lot. I hold off on initiative rolls pretty much until the first punch is thrown. You know what I mean? Like I don't
Right.
like rolling initiative, and even that first punch, even that first hit, goes through before initiative. I hate. I mean, I will honestly say I cannot stand it when it's like, okay, you know what? I'm punching this guy. Okay, roll initiative. Like, no, 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 I'm going to punch this guy right now. And he's like, yeah, roll initiative. And I'm like, okay, I roll initiative. Great. I'm last in initiative. So you're telling me my thought to punch this guy started everyone in initiative, but they all have a full 6 seconds before my thought
Ahead
goes
of
through
me to
my
do
fist into this
something.
guy's face. They're all going to react. Why are they going to
Like
attack?
he could run away. away and go attack somebody else and do something like before I
it
even get. Nah, that don't make no
infuriates
type of
me
sense.
that you're like, okay, I draw my bow to
Yeah.
attack that goblin that doesn't see me. Roll initiative. What do you mean? Why are they in initiative? They should it's the idea of rolling initiative and then, oh, I killed that guy outright. Why am I now in initiative? Why am I in turn based? I should still be in RP mode because no one else knows that that guy just died, right? It's like the difference between playing like Hitman where you kill someone and then nothing fucking happens, or playing like almost like Cyberpunk where you kill someone and then all the enemies are immediately alerted. I mean, I know that's a bad example because you can silently kill people in Cyberpunk, but
Right.
it's just, there are games where it's like you kill an enemy and all of a sudden all the enemies just immediately know there's a fight and immediately know where to go. Versus if you take someone out, why are you
An
now in an
exclamation point
initiative?
to say, "Quick."
And to me, it's also even made worse when you do the initiative thing, and then you're like, okay, it's the enemy's initiative. They're gonna walk over here. Okay, it's your initiative. Like, why? Why are you wasting our time telling us whose initiative it is and explaining that? Just tell me the guards don't see anything and they're moving and they're continuing with their patrols, right? Like, it's just one of those things for me where I wait as long as I can to start initiative, because initiative means, again, the idea of like what we've talked about, the traditional concept of HP is someone who's locked in mortal combat. That's what HP is supposed to represent. Not someone getting punched in the face at the bar, not someone getting slapped by their, significant other, not a peasant child does not stub their knee on the ground and fucking die. But you'll take 1d4 damage falling off of a box? Bullshit. You know what I'm saying? There are some things that, like, the concept of damage sometimes gets overblown when people are like, oh, you take 1 point of damage. Why?
Yeah.
All they did was slap me, or I fell out of my chair. 1 point of damage makes sense if my dagger falls out of its sheath and cuts me. That's a point of damage. Why? Because something like a paper cut or a small cut that will heal in a couple days isn't super negative against you in battle, but it is a touchy point. It's a weakness. It's something taking up your mind. It's something taking up your ability to survive because you're healing, right? Those are the things that I think about, which is why initiative to me matters so much, because when you start initiative, it's in my mind, that's everybody now has a mindset of, okay, it's now is it, right? Now, granted, like, not necessarily when you're doing, like the town guards, maybe they're just trying to knock you out or whatever. But the point is, that's when everyone knows it's no longer a game, right? Punching someone may not necessarily immediately start an initiative, in my opinion, but it could in the right context, right? If you punch someone that just insulted you, I probably wouldn't start initiative, because that is a response that everyone in the room goes, oh, okay, it just got escalated, but like, he kind of deserved it. Whereas if you just walk up to, the king and pull him out of his throne and punch him, every guard in there is going to, without question, now think you need to die.
Yep.
Whereas if you're talking to just the
town,
like a thug, and one of his lackeys walks up and insults you and you smack his lackey around, he's not immediately going to go to be like, you need to die. He's going to be like, okay, so you won't take shit. I got you. You know what I'm saying? Like, to me, that's why, I don't know, initiative is one of those weird things. I'm really touchy about when initiative should be used, because again, that's that dynamicness, right? If going back to your example, if you are sneaking up, or if you notice something and are cued in on there's an ambush ahead of you, maybe we're talking about, like, again, not you doing the ambush, but let's say you notice an ambush. Why is it just an extra round, right? The ambushers, if you notice them before they notice you, maybe that's a roll. Maybe you as a DM make a roll to say, oh, you've noticed them? Okay, we're going to do percentile rolls, or a 20 d20. If you can outdo my d20, you notice them before they notice you. And now the RP continues. Now you get to do like okay, so they're set up in the trees. They probably have, like, a tripwire or something. Then you notice, like, oh, there's leaves on the ground. There's probably a ditch there to get our cart, right? Like, you can start to pick apart their trap to use it to your advantage, or at least get around it, or not have the encounter at all, right? You don't need to force the encounter. But yeah, these are all, like, pre-encounter ideas that I think are just underutilized. I don't think they're not utilized at all. I've seen these types, but I just don't think that people really, like, get into the complexity of what you could do, right? Like, imagine the different scenarios of fortifying a location, right? and what that could mean, whether it's a farmhouse, whether it's a, you know, the site of a ruins, whether it is a castle, right? And you're actually having to, like, you know, maybe, you know, they poisoned the general and no one's there to lead the, you know, the entire town guard, and you have to set it up before being sieged. So you have to make really major decisions, and you're not a general of war, but you know what? You just so it's like there's so many ways that I think that you could have fun with these ideas of setting up your own ambushes, setting up a fortification for an oncoming battle. And again, it doesn't have to replace combat, but it can be a precursor that allows the players to feel like they're controlling the playing field before that encounter begins. And then what did KAge say?
I definitely like that idea.
Oh yeah, you weren't here, so so yeah. Once you watch the
Oh
episode,
yeah,
you'll be able to give them some
that
more
was the
feedback.
episode I just started watching, so I'm excited to see what happens.
Um, but yeah, do you have any other ideas for, like, because I have some other bullet points, but for like pre-planning, right? Like we've talked about, like whether you can give them the opportunity to see something coming, or give them the opportunity to set their own ambush, their own fortification, you know, prevent an ambush on them.
Yeah,
You
I
know,
think for me the biggest thing is the balance between, all right, what is it that I as a DM am suggesting, and now again, what I'm talking about is mostly from the DM, from my stance as a DM's perspective, and so the biggest thing I want to make sure that I balance is like how much it is that I'm giving them versus how much it is that they are bringing to the table, right?
mm-hmm.
Because in and this is something else that I wanted to bring up, because one of the ways that we were talking about how to introduce this to them is maybe there's an NPC there that mentioned something, and I think this honestly might be an entire topic all on its own, but the idea of a helper NPC, just
Mm-hmm.
like whenever you have a D&D party, you have an NPC that travels with them, that's just a part of their party, that's there to help them if they're stuck, like give them ideas that they might not have otherwise, be like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, what about this thing over here, just there. And I don't want to call it a get out of jail free card, but like lightweight, it's there to, if they are truly and utterly stuck, and like maybe I didn't do a good enough job as a DM bringing them the clues they needed to get through this point, then they're not actually stuck, you know?
Right.
Like
I
you've been
also
in
like using
actual
roles for
video
that
games
too.
where you say what?
I also like using roles for that too. So like if I know that they're stuck and I don't want to necessarily like throw an NPC
Yes.
at them, I'll even be like, hey, give me a wisdom check. You know, not necessarily a perception, right? Like let's say they fail theirs, I'm like, hey, give me a wisdom check. I'm like, you know, based on your backstory,
Not
right?
tell
You know,
you.
you think maybe like this. Like I've done that where I'll throw in a random check
So
that makes sense to me to give, because again, I look at it from
here's
their character's point of view, right? The player may be
I,
struggling,
I do
but is the
get that, but
character.
where I struggle with that is I cannot tell you how many times I've tried that exact same mentality and they roll like a two.
Yeah.
And then it not only feels bad giving them that information, it feels bad getting that information. It feels like you didn't earn it. Like, hey, I'm asking you to like earn something or like do something to like get this, and you do a terrible job, and then you give it to them anyways. Like
No, I had
it
no,
doesn't
no, I
really
100%,
feel
I 100% agree.
like,
Which
and so it's like, like I get wanting to give them that role, but then sometimes it's like sucks. So do I just let them roll again? Do I ask everyone at the table to roll? Do I? And then it just feels like you're digging. Oh,
if you
four,
can
five,
make
six,
sure that
seven people
you
roll terrible.
if you were able, I would say I would have everyone on the table roll a different stat or something if I knew, or I would give any character I knew who could come up with this idea their fair shot, as long as it was a unique shot, right? Like I wouldn't give three characters the same wisdom roll to learn the same thing. But
Right.
it's like, hey, wizard, you're smart and you do a lot of studying. Give me a wisdom check for see if you've read anything. And rogue, you get, you hear a lot of stuff all day long. You just get, you just listen. Give me an intelligence check to see if you have any just random piece of knowledge that just is going to like, your character would just be like, oh wait, I've heard of that. And then, like fighter, give me, a history check or something from, whatever. Like if I could justify why they would have a unique approach, I would give any character that had a unique approach to it. I've done that though, where I've given them as a last resort. I usually leave the role for last resort where they're completely stuck. But this is what comes down to the type of DM you want to be, is whether or not you're okay not doing what you've planned, because we know that that's a big trope for, the DM hardships, right? Like DM first world problems. Oh my gosh, like I planned all of this and my characters didn't do it. But, also like, are you okay not giving them something, whether or not you want to? So in those cases, right, they're stuck. I think that their characters have a chance at understanding it and they still roll bad. I'm perfectly okay with them missing out. And you've been a part of that too. Like Dobbed is actually, I think it was either Dobbed or Allo, had that situation where you had that like last ditch thing and it was like, nope, nothing.
It was Allo.
And it's like, those are frustrating situations for both of us. But at the same time, for me,
now,
as frustrating as it is, for me, it's more like now that's a new challenge for me to now, how do I make that lack of knowledge engaging? Because it's one thing to just say, oh, yeah, you don't know, and then you just wave off like it was never important. For me, now I have to figure out, now what does the world look like because you don't have that? Like, how is that lack of knowledge going to hurt you? Because one thing that I've seen in the past is you'll have those rolls, like a perception check. You'll have DMs be like, roll me a perception check. Oh, you failed. And then no trap, no ambush, no nothing. And it was like, so was it? And then it's like, was it you never find out like, you missed a key to an important room or you missed a certain relic. It was something they thought was cool in the moment, but you didn't get. But it's like, if it's not actually affecting the game, that's where you need to decide whether the rule is worth it, right? And that's where I think I would do, is where if I think it's worth it, but it's also worth it to lose, like, it's really worth having that maybe yes or no, I'm okay doing the role. But yeah, like it's hard as a DM to
if
decide.
it's for like mostly relevant, I don't want to say irrelevant, but there are certain things that are what I would call non-essentials, right? If I really want to meet a certain NPC, if I really want to get an item, if I really want to go do a thing, I just don't get to. Like, that kind of sucks.
Yeah.
But there are other things, and I think more of what I'm actually getting at, because like that stuff I'm not worried about. Like, it is what it is. Like, I'm not really gonna push for anything like that. But what I'm more talking about is, it's like, yo, you are trapped in this dungeon, and I created what I thought was a creative puzzle, but I didn't think it was gonna be that hard. And
Right.
now you guys are in this box, and you're potentially going to sit here for the rest of the game and foreverdom if you don't escape. Like, I'm not okay with just ending. All right, you guys all turn to skeletons in here because you can't find
No,
a way to
that's
get out
totally
of this room.
that's totally fair, right? That's a different situation where if the entire premise
that's
or the
what I'm
entire
getting
session
at.
is
That's
relying
the
on this.
mentality, is like, in order for them to move forward, they're stuck. Do I just want to always give them a get out of jail free helper NPC? Or do I want to just always like have some weird miraculous way to just get them out whenever they seemingly get themselves stuck in some situations? Like, I was about to mention, like, video games. There's plenty of video games where you're either like physically stuck on the spot and you have to like reboot the whole game or reload a
Right.
save just to get out of there, or you like kill somebody and you're like stuck and you can't get out of this mission or something like that, and you literally break the game in a way that it can't be completed. Like, I don't want my players to experience that kind of stuff. And so, like, what are like ways that I can think of other than just like, oh,
So
God snapped his fingers and
ways
you're
that I do
magically out of
that,
there?
ways that I have overcome that, because you know me, I don't like DM Machina anything. So
Yeah, very much so.
for me, the way I would go about that is if I felt like they were truly stuck, and whether or not I felt their characters could have something that the players don't, could be a role, or they, they don't have that, or they do have it and they failed their role. Basically, they're at the point to where it's like, I mean, I try not to put situations as a like, you can't progress without this, but sometimes it does happen, whether you've did it intentionally or not. So what I'll typically do is, if I didn't pre-plan it, if it's starting to go that direction, just because of the way that High Point works for me, is I'll start immediately while they're still kind of, doing some stuff, or I'll, while I'm like maybe probing them with some questions to kind of like maybe kickstart their ideas without telling them, hey, go look over here. But like, hey, I'll ask questions like, hey, did you guys look everywhere? Like all, because you've heard me do this where it's like, hey guys, like, are you sure you looked everywhere? Where did you all look? Talk. Like, everybody say, what did you do? I'm not telling you where you have or haven't looked, but what I'll do is be like, have you taken stock?
Yeah.
Remember, walk through every step you've taken so far and what happened. Because sometimes you've given them plenty of clues, but they were so frustrated that their idea didn't work, they didn't hear the clue. So I will do that. I'll throw it back on the players. Guys, what have you tried? Like, we've tried everything. Like, what name one thing you've tried? And then they'll be like, I did this. Be like, well, what happened? It didn't work. And then another player will be like, well, what he said was this. And then they'll be like, so it's not that it didn't. So they'll be like, well, what does that mean? And it's like, well, what did you expect to happen? What did you think I said happened? And what did they remember I said happened? Like, you basically just get them to walk back through your clues. That's one option that I've done before. And that one actually works a lot when you have a larger gaming group. Because while someone's trying something, everyone's paying attention, thinking of their own ideas, they're going to know what was done, but they may not jump in because they're like, oh, your idea didn't work, now it's my turn. But when you make them all walk back through it, and then someone goes, wait a second, he actually said that we heard a noise. Why did we hear a noise when you did that? Can you try that again? And then, like, they'll maybe repeat something. They're like, let's see if we can repeat what we felt or heard, or if you've given those details, having them walk through it again and make them more detailed, like,
Right.
basically walk through it like you took notes, sometimes will kickstart an idea. But while they're doing that, that's usually my first step if I don't want to give it to them and I'm just trying to like help them without giving them the idea. I'll make them do that. While they're doing that, while they're trying to generate those ideas, what I'm doing in the background, which is kind of just, how we've talked about this, how I develop High Point, how High Point just evolves, and I'm constantly looking at ripple effects. It's kind of the opposite. Normally, I have to process the ripple effects from my players, what you guys are doing in the realm, and what that means for the rest of it. That's typically what I have to do. But there is a reverse aspect of that, because there's tons of things happening. So, although you're one of the pebbles in the lake that's making ripples in the lake, I'm always having to remember a bunch of other ripples, right? And the ripples aren't always from players. So now I have to think, while you guys are walking through your clues and maybe you'll find something, I'm thinking, okay, you're making all these ripples. What ripples would be affecting you guys? So I'll start to think, hey, let's say you're in a jail cell. There's only one way out. They've missed all the clues. They're doing all that thing. They can't get out. And they can't progress because they're going to just be locked in here. I might be looking at, when was the last time I said that a guard walked through here? Are there guards? What's the likelihood of a guard coming through here? What's the likelihood? So you could do something like, oh, well, they haven't been checked on. I did say that they got checked on when they got thrown in here in the morning. I did say the moon was out, so it's been all day. So maybe if they can't get out, you throw them an alternative way out. Maybe a guard walks by and they're able to be like, oh my God, get his attention. And now you have a whole new situation where, yeah, you have to scrap the original puzzle,
Right.
but you're not giving them an NPC that just handed it to them. You're just giving them an alternative way out. So maybe a guard comes in to check on them and they ambush the guard and take a key. Or the guard has something that is more blatantly obvious to the direction you were headed, you were telling them to go, right? Like, maybe they knock out the guard doesn't have a key, but there's a note that says, hey, don't forget to, lock that storm drain, So, this animal doesn't get in, and they're like, wait, there's a human-sized storm drain, and that was what you were trying to lead them to. But you couldn't get them to go try the grate that's on the ground that's unlocked, because, you had it as just, it's a grate on the ground. Why would it be locked? It's just a grate. They could just move it and they'll go out through the sewers. That was my whole plan, but they don't check the fucking sewer. But now you give this guy a note that was never in existence, but you look at the ripple effect. Well, if this thing was unlocked, maybe the guards knew about it. If they knew about it, it would make sense that someone was supposed to lock it and didn't. What if that's the guy they find, and then they find the note that he forgot to lock it, and boom, they have a clue to where you wanted them to go. It's not Deus Ex Machina because they had to get the note. You just gave them a new hurdle that is
I do
outside of the
like
realm
the
of what you created.
idea that you find a you almost have like a missing puzzle piece here, right? And the you're trying to find this a place for it right next to adjacent to your players so that they can grab a hold of it and get it.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting. I know that we've talked before about, finding certain songs or finding certain characters or finding certain items that just happen to fit in the world in a certain place. And I think, this is a weird version of the same thing, but instead of like stuff and things and people, it's more like situations and possible scenarios that can go down, that can allow an opportunity. Because the reality is, like, there are so many times where you might overhear somebody. Well, why did you overhear them? What is the likelihood that you would have overheard them?
Right.
What all domino effects had to be exactly in place for them to be walking by as you were standing there, and so that you were able to overhear this conversation? Like, how did all those things come into place? And so,
Mm-hmm.
if you're like, all right, what's the reality of the situation? They're down here, they're doing all this stuff. What's the likely? Now, it's low, sure, but it's possible, right? And if you can allow and create and again, I don't want to say manufacture, but that's basically you're birthing a scenario, a path for your players to go take and pursue, just like your players birth paths and scenarios that me as the DM would never have thought of before, right? And so then we actually go down and explore those paths as well. So now I'm just bringing a new and a different one with other aspects. I can very much get behind that concept of just, hey, let me find what's real. Let me take what I know. Let me build what I understand and put it manifest it here in a place that's actually going to be fairly valuable.
And
So I'm
that's
here for that.
I'm not saying it's easy. That's the hard part too. Is like I'm actively
Very much so. It takes a
this is just
minute.
one of the things that I will do in some situations because it is a little bit more difficult when you're dealing with the I don't want to just create manufacture something on the spot, but because I have that integrity, I have to make sure that it's one of those things where you have to understand as a DM that you can't possibly plan for everything that your players are going to do, right? Especially if you operate in a setting like ours where it is a open world aspect,
Yeah.
right? So with that, I also have to give myself that leniency. I have a high integrity of not just doing the DM thing of because I said so. But that doesn't mean that every last little thing that happens and is said and that is done in my games was pre-planned before that exact moment. Not 100% of everything I do is perfectly pre-planned, but it is acted upon. Like all of the things that have happened are done with care and thought. Even if they're in the moment, I can't really explain it, but it's not like I just make things up and then because I've never made something up in the moment and then gone back and been like, oh, I fucked that up. And I don't mean like, oh my God, I'm great, I'm flawless.
Yeah.
It's just my methods for doing this and the way I can quickly run an idea in my head
Yeah.
through
They
several
give you checks and
scenarios.
balances.
Yeah, as long as as long as
Yeah.
it passed the balancing check in a moment's notice, I can start coming up with things. But that's the idea is you have to be comfortable as a
And I
DM
think,
recognizing the difference between I'm just going to suddenly make an NPC that doesn't make sense to show up versus giving yourself a moment to go, "Hey, a second. No, they're in a ruins, but someone put them here. That means that that person has to make sure that they're still alive, which means someone's going to come check on them, which means they have a new
when
opportunity to get out of here, right? Like
when you have
that makes
worlds when you have worlds like you and Cosmic, and like I desire to build, but I don't think it's there yet. But like when you have worlds that are that in depth, like they almost begin to come alive, right?
yes.
Like I feel like I've been able to create that with an individual character, but like, doing that in an entire world, that's a whole nother can of worms, right? And so when you're in a place, you're people can call it like pulling it out of your ass or making it up, but it's really not. Like just like I always say stuff like, I'm kind of mad at what Dobbs doing right now because it's not what I would do, it's what he would do, right? Like he's playing that character. I'm just interpreting what he would do in this moment in time because I'm the one who knows all the things about him and I understand why he does what he does. But it's still him doing it. It's the same thing for you as a DM as you go through these processes. It's not like, oh, I'm just gonna pull something out of my butt, but like I know this character, I know this place, I know this castle, I know this city, I know what it does, I know why it does it, I understand its thought process, its heart, and I'm making these decisions, I'm making these statements about what's happening and what's going on because I understand how this place works. And there are a lot of nuances that are a part of that make sense to me because I have the majority of the pieces. And even if they're not all in the forefront of my mind right now in this moment, like I'm a martial artist, right? I know how to throw kicks and do. I can break down for you eventually every single piece of the kick. But when I'm in a sparring match, I'm not thinking about the different parts of the kick. I'm just throwing it
Yeah.
because I understand how those kicks are supposed to feel, how they're
And the
supposed to
difference
work, how
is
they're supposed to
how
move.
how you learned how to do, like, so that's a good idea too. How you learn how to do that maneuver, you learned it piece by piece and then you learn how to do it fluid. But you weren't taught how to use that move as a counter to every possible attack. You haven't learned how to use that move as an aggressive attack in every situation you could from every angle at a person. You were taught something, and by knowing its fundamentals, you can apply it quickly to a variety of situations that
It's
you've
like
never
math.
experienced before. But
It's like math.
you
You
know
know how
in
the
that moment
operators
it's going
work?
to work or it's not, right? Like you don't just randomly
You're
throw
not
that
taught
kick.
every addition problem.
Yeah, you don't know why you know it, but you know in this moment throwing this kick isn't going to work. You're not seriously sitting there going, "Oh, I've been in this exact moment and I remember what." No, you just know. I know my mechanics. I know the foundation. It won't work now, but when you see that opening, you weren't waiting for that opening. You weren't telling yourself when he does this attack and he misses, that's my moment. Or you weren't sitting there calculating every moment. Nope, 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 not the moment, not the moment, not the moment. You just saw it. You saw it and you're like, and you didn't even say, now is the moment. You just did, right? Like you just do it. And that to
And
me
and
is
it,
like,
it doesn't always work like
yeah, no, it's not always perfect, but to me, like that's almost like you're right. Like that's kind of the approach for when it comes to like the DMing. It's like I stick to those fundamentals, and as long as my fundamentals are there, I never seem to like do the
yeah.
wrong
And
move.
but even for me, when I'm in a match, when I'm doing these things, like there is a certain aspect of a flow state. Like I very much agree that you're not making a specific decision every single time, but there are times where I'm in a sparring match and I'm literally thinking to myself, "Yo, I'm gonna set this dude up to do this
Oh
specific
yeah,
combo." Like I will try and do certain things intentionally, but at the same time, like you're also completely actively taking in your surroundings and actively taking in how your opponent is responding because just because of what I plan doesn't mean that's exactly how it plays out. I sure hope it does, but not necessarily. So if I can put myself in a place where I'm aware. Now, as a DM, it's kind of nice. Like I wish I had the awareness I do as a DM in a sparring match. Like if I could just slow down time and stop and think and be like,
who
I
wouldn't want
wonder
an
what
hour to
skill I
think of
can
what your
pull
every move
from
is?
now. Like it's not nearly as but you have that chance like when you're in the middle of like, hey, what do these people need? Like give me a second, let me think. Oh, this could happen. Oh, and then you bring it in right when the timing needs to happen and would be perfect. And like it doesn't even though it happens now, even though it happens in the perfect timing, it doesn't feel like it's fake. especially when it makes sense. You know
Exactly.
what I mean? When it's something that flows naturally, that feels organic and connects to everything else. Like if you were to get like halfway down the road of escaping this and find a gaping hole, like there's really no sewer system underneath this jail cell. Like why would there be a thing right like and just oh I'm just gonna put a thing here so you can escape. Like
Yeah.
it wouldn't be like you would find that hole later and you'd be like, "Ow, well, we'll just make it make sense." Like what? And so like it's hard. It almost breaks a little bit of the immersion that I think a lot of people seek when they're looking to play a game like this. You know, I mean, not all the time, but still. So I don't know. I really like the idea that that can be something that people are really allowed to embody and to seek out. It's like, hey, I want to be able to do something different, to think something different,
Hmm.
to hey, even though like I'm in this sparring match and I've never tried throwing a twist kick before, I see this guy's throwing a kick on this side and theoretically a twist kick would work. Can I try it? Can I try to do this thing I don't normally do or I don't normally know how to do?
Hmm.
Right? Let me try a little fusion technique just to see what
Hey, you know what?
happens. You know what I
Who knows?
mean?
Who knows? Um, no, and that also
Make it
goes a
happen.
little bit more into the second part, like the second bullet point, because so we're still in like the pre encounter phase, because we talked about pre planning, like giving them encounters where they're more in control of the pre planning stage, but then there's the other aspect of pre planning where it's not so much control of the combat or the battlefield, where it's like the ambush or the fortification. But there's also the pre planning stage where allowing players, like another way to approach it is allowing players to have knowledge of what's coming without being able to change it, but the knowledge could be powerful. So instead of knowing that, hey, they're going to be crossing this road and this bridge, we can set up an ambush, or they're attacking us at this town, we know when they're going to, they're going to be here in 3 days, we have time to fortify. This is more of a, hey, you're going to be going and traveling, you're going to have to go through these mountains, and you know that there's a very specific cave system with a very specific type of creature that has a venom, right? Knowing that, like if you could know that you're going to have some sort of danger, if you could give your characters an opportunity to say, hey, that there's going to be dangers here, but you don't know what type. If they're smart enough, if you give them the opportunity to ask around, maybe go out of their way to find people who have traveled through that way before, find out what, either the animal or the creature that they're going to face, or find someone who knows, the difficulties behind the venom, how, what the venom can do to them and how they can prevent it, how they can make an antidote, you know, or
Yep.
just basically give them a way, if they're not going to be in control of combat, right? Give them a way to feel more empowered, right? Instead of it just being like, oh no, we're in combat. How many enemies are there? Let's suddenly make a strategic plan. And if you don't want to give them full control of, okay,
Or even
we're
if
the
you just
battlefield
had a
controllers, but
little piece of information, like, hey, they're going to be traveling with a carriage, and that carriage is going to be filled to the brim with alchemist fire, right?
boom, yeah.
You could do all kinds of different plans and strategies on how to deal with that, depending upon whether you want to keep it and keep as many of them in functional condition as possible, or whether you want to use it to help blow them up, lure them to
Or
a place away from the city or unpopulated area.
I mean,
Yeah, you could
there's
do a
even
lot with information like that.
yeah, being able to, like, if you can talk to the right people, getting a weakness of an enemy, and I don't just mean like like a creature or a monster and knowing what it's weak to, but like let's say that you're trying to like go against somebody and they're basically like they don't want to work with you, they don't want to help you out or whatever, but like you find out that they have like you know uh like maybe they recently broke a rib or they have like weak hips or
Mm.
something, and so like in almost an RP or to start the battle, you go and do a cold shot, like be like, yeah, I walk up to him and I just sock him in that rib, that rib they told me about, I just go right for it.
Mm.
And imagine that you just walk up right before the battle, you do that, you bring him to his knees, and then you just back, and then I just look at his men, like I just look at all of them, and then it's like me as a DM might be like, roll for morale, because all of a sudden you walk up and just one shot their dude because you knew you had met like the town physician and he just let it slip that he works on all the guards, and you schmoozed him or you broke into his notes and found out that the dude recently had a broken rib. So as long as basically it's like a concentration spell. He's constantly putting on this front that he's fine. But if you can just walk up and like tag him, or that he has a bum knee, right? So you could like go after that knee in combat and like little things like that, giving the players not an advantage per se, right? Not like making them feel like, oh, we can now walk all over this, but more than just, hey, you're in combat and deal with it right here and now, giving them any amount of pre-knowledge or pre-prep, even if you're not giving them control of the battlefield, right? Knowing a wizard has an affinity for fire spells is enough knowledge to know what is dangerous and what's not.
Yeah.
Having, if for a fact that a wizard, uses like illusionary magic, like you could prepare for that. If someone has if that you're going to go up against a certain army and you are able to find out what type of armor they have, so what weapons to carry, whether it's bludgeoning, piercing, slashing, it's not an advantage as in you're just going to, take over, but it makes you feel more like you have something the enemy doesn't. If what the enemy's weapons are, so you can don the correct armor, is an advantage that doesn't fully change the tide of battle. But imagine what that does for the spirits of the players to feel like they're not the ones who were blindsided walking into this battle.
I have a slightly off-topic question that I feel like I really need to ask.
Go for it, man.
You were talking about illusion magic, and I was just, for whatever reason, just thinking about random ways to counter illusion magic. All right, what is your stance on if I create an illusion in a room, does that illusion have a reflection? Now, my thought process is the illusion magic affecting creatures' minds? Or is it actually a physical manifestation?
That's a good point. It's a good idea. So I would say,
because if it is
I would say that it doesn't matter unless you want it to. And here's my justification. If it works kind of like it does in High Point, creation magic creates things, right? It's the magic forms it. Illusion magic is just that. It is playing on the minds of people. Now, you could tell the difference between an illusion magic making a physical illusion and an illusion magic making someone believe it by how the spell rates. Because a lot of them say you can only affect so many targets. That would be in the mind, right? If not everyone sees it. But there are certain illusions that you can cast and are just there. So I distinguish
technically
the type.
Minor illusion is like that.
So I first would say you have to distinguish the type of illusion, because some illusions affect everyone, and in my mind that means that they affect the real world. That is in the pole everyone can see. That means that magic has created a physical visual pole.
It'd be like a physical hologram.
Yes. Versus if it says target 3 creatures, that is in that 3 creatures' head. Nobody else sees it. Now, the reason why I say it doesn't matter unless you want it to is, let's say you're in a room and you make a pole appear. If it's a physical object that everyone can see, it has a reflection, because light, if you have physics, light's bouncing off of the object. That's how everyone sees it. And if it's only in certain people's heads, the reason why I say it doesn't matter unless you want it to. That only matters if you want the ability to make the illusionary magic that complex. If you can make someone believe, in my opinion, the reason it doesn't matter in High Point is if you can make someone believe 100% that their greatest fear is magically all of a sudden standing in front of them, and they will act as if, then yeah, the illusion is smart enough to have a reflection in that person's mind. But if you as a DM don't want it to matter, like if you say that can be a way around illusion magic, then you have to say it matters. But to me, if I can make you truly believe it,
kind of
that's part of the belief. You will see a reflection because you need to believe it.
And I would say it would likely depend on how powerful the magic is.
And I like that. I would
Because
prefer if you're gonna
I
make a
would think
call, do it that
I would
way.
think that it would need to actually, you as the caster would need to ensure you're projecting not only the actual image, but you would have to remember to project the reflection as well.
And I'm
Because
okay
if I'm
setting like a
creating
level,
this
like you
illusion
have to be
for
at
you,
a certain level to just mentally compartmentalize all of that. I'm okay with that. I don't do it that way just because, again, I think that if the spell targets you
right?
and is if the spell is designed to make you believe it, the spell is going to do whatever it needs to do to make you believe it. If you need to see a reflection,
Yeah.
now granted, I will say though that really high
Because if somebody like
intelligence
planned and
people,
just like brings out brings around a mirror with them and like checks it
and
in a mirror, is
and
that
that's the
real
thing.
or something like that?
I would see. I would do this if you wanted to make a hard enough argument. I would probably consider putting a level cap of at least like level 5 before that aspect goes away, or maybe level 10. Right after level
Hmm.
10, that's not done. So if it's a level 10 spell or a level 10 caster or lower, you have the chance of seeing through it. But because I mean, you could also because I think there are some illusionary spells that have
No,
DC
I like
saves,
that.
and
Yes.
that's how you could justify why you DC save is because you're like, oh, I noticed a window over there didn't change color, or you could start saying things like the reason why there's a DC save on illusion checks because you don't see a shadow. So you were smart enough to be like,
Mm.
oh, this ain't real. There's no shadow. So I'm okay either making it a level scale or again reading what the spell you're using says and just going off of that. Um, but yeah, the idea for me is it only should matter if you think it should because again, if it's physical, it's doing enough to have it's obviously just physically an illusion, but it's there. And if it's in someone's mind, I think you could either A, make it the level of the caster, B, not matter at all because again the magic will do what it needs to make you believe it, or C, make it about the intelligence level of the victim. So a certain intelligence height will allow you to see through it, right? So if you're under say 13
So
intelligence, you'll fall for it, but if you have a higher than 13, you can make them have a roll like their own personal DC check, and they could see things like there's no shadow, there's no reflection. So it's one of those things where you could implement many ways to do it, and I agree with all of them. Um, I just think that it's
I'm curious, and
situational.
this is more for you. But like, say if Dove were in a situation and something happened, and he was suspicious of whether it was an illusion or not, but he wasn't sure, and he himself didn't really have any way to check. Although I can probably think of several. But like, if he just had that, inclination in his mind, and he saw that there was a mirror nearby, if he were to like look over and check, I'm just curious if it would work, hypothetically speaking, if it were a low enough level spell,
I can say
you
with
know.
certainty in high point there are plenty of situations where I could imagine that working, and some that at just as
It
stated
would not.
it would not. It would be all again. It would be
That's very fair.
yeah, but 100%. I agree with that. I think that that is a very valid because there are some illusion spells that people are allowed to see past. So again, I think that with
Yes.
all magic, if someone can save against a fireball, just can get engulfed in flames and just a monk can just go I'm not on fire. I'm not on fire. Like the whole point is if you can do that, there's no reason why you can't justify. Now, granted, I would allow both certain situations where I would pre-choose what type of effect the illusion would have, but there's also a way where if you just said, "Hey, you know what? Here's a situation. Here are a few reasons why I think Dob would question this. I want to look like I'm looking for anything odd." If you could justify why you have a suspicion and you're actively looking, those are those moments where yes, I would absolutely allow justifiable flaws in the illusion, unless of course it's like god level created illusion or a super high
Of
mage. But I
course.
mean, if you're coming, and this is why I said it depends, right? Obviously it really depends on the situation you were in, but let's just say it's an average illusion, and it has every reason to be believed. But if you gave me a good enough reason where Dov would be suspicious, and you had either an idea, a method to test this, or if you're like, hey, I'm looking at them around the room, is there anything that just shows that this isn't real, right? Like I have a feeling. Here's my reasons why. I'm looking for shadows. I'm looking for reflections. Do I have something like if you're pushing and giving reasonable like suggestions, I would absolutely allow you to find something, right? If I could justifiably make something like showable. But to me, I don't think that should be a rule of thumb. I don't think it should just be a every single time I can pick up a mirror and guarantee to see an illusion. I don't like that,
Right, right.
but I 100%
I
believe.
totally hear that.
Yeah, but I 100% believe in it. I mean, even if that was just a character trait, right? Even if, like, let's say you went in your backstory where it's like I've dealt with vampires, so I always just keep a little like little pocket, like a little pocket
Hmm.
mirror, and it's like whenever I'm talking to people, I just kind of just oh, sorry, checking the time. And you could do that. Like, dude, what if you wanted to build it into your character where you had a pocket watch?
That would be kind of
But inside
cool.
the pocket watch
Yes,
was
with a
a
little
mirror.
mirror in
So
it.
you check the time. Just your character
That would
persona
be
is
kind of
just a guy
clean.
who just constantly click, click. But what you're doing is every time you open it up, you do a quick scan of the room and see if there's any reflections you can't see, right? Like with Dob with the ring, and you just spin it. If you just wrote that into your character,
Bro,
I
I'm
would
not.
totally right. I would, as a DM, take that into account and use it, right? Like, so yes, I would say as a rule of thumb, I would not just say in High Point anybody can dispel an illusion with a mirror, but in certain situations or with the right character build, yes, that would work.
So that pocket watch just gave me a warlock character idea of instead of checking that behind you to see if you see illusions or vampires, like when you look in the mirror, this specific mirror, uh, you can see like the eyes of your patron like over your shoulder, and that's how you like communicate with your patron,
Oh, you just
is
open it
like
up
through
and
this
then you just have a
pocket watch. And
conversation. It's like a conversation with him, but he's just like
it,
always like right behind
yes,
you.
it's yeah, he's got his like these weird, creepy, glowing eyes like right behind you, and like oh, that would be a very interesting character idea. Anyways, but all of this was very much off topic. All of this
It
was
doesn't
very
matter,
much off topic. I
but no,
just was
it
curious
isn't
about
necessarily off
illusion.
topic though because I mean, this is all pre combat like the idea of before the encounter what things you can do. So I mean if there's an illusion
Yeah.
involved, I mean it's still the idea of knowledge is power, right? Knowing what you can do and
Yes,
giving the
very much
players
so.
the opportunity to find that information before the encounter. Um, Again, not to give
I
them
mean, shoot, yeah,
battlefield
if you're a
control,
wizard.
but like again being able to say hey we're about to go fight this monster and allowing them to ask or just mentioning if you know that they're going to fight something they've never seen before, if they don't ask, mention there's a library in the town. You know how easy that is to be like, oh yeah,
Mm,
and then you've passed a library, and they're like, oh, a
yeah.
library? What kind of library? You're like, oh, if you go in, it's like your standard library, but they have a couple specialty sections. They have like a magical, like it looks like an alchemist section. They have a bestiary section. They have a cooking
Mm,
section, and they're like, oh, bestiary, let's go over there. And then you're like, well, what are you looking for? Well, obviously we're looking for what the weaknesses of the monster we're gonna fight, right? Like, there's always ways to add in aspects where you don't have to say you're
yeah.
going to the library to do this, but giving the players those options, even though they don't know to take them, that's what I like to do. Because for me, it's like I don't feel bad if I give you 10 clues or 10 options to do something and you don't think or pick any of them. That's not my problem, right? Like I'm not here to say I want you to go to the library or I want you to do this. My thing is
Mm,
I my job, at least for High Point, is to make sure that my players are fully aware of the options that are available to them. But I can't just
do you
say it's boring
feel
for me to say you can do anything, and it's nowhere near impossible, or it's near impossible for me to tell them everything they can do, right? But my
do you
job is
feel
to
it's when they when a player is trying to, I guess, decide what it is that they want to do, like what direction they want to go. Like a lot of the times, I know for me, I get stuck because I don't always want to derail what we're doing. And a
Mhm.
lot of the times I feel like wanting to make a pit stop off for the library or wanting to go check and talk to this NPC because like you could in theory go on these trails for like ever just trying to prepare. And so it's like I have a hard time balancing like, okay, I want you guys to be prepared. I want to give you guys opportunities to do these things, but we could spend like 6 sessions and not even get to the fight or not even get to the encounter, right? And I don't want everyone to just be hanging out waiting for you to finish gathering all the information you want to gather, you
Mm-hmm.
know. And I guess there's balancing and like how much of that you actually role play out completely or
So
I mean, there's technically always options to just, hey, you want to game this later. It'll be an interaction that you have later or something like that. I don't know, but
so I do have something that I use for this. So my favorite technique for something like this, I use this technique in a lot of different scenarios, but for the one you're specifically talking about, where you don't want to, you either have players that don't want to derail, or they're just not sure. Like they know what options are available, but they're just not sure which way to go. One thing that I will do if I don't have an NPC there to basically act as that soundboard, because me as a DM, I'm not going to give away anything. I'm not going to tell them what they should or shouldn't do. It's just going to
yeah,
be I have to give them as much knowledge and as much opportunity to make a sound decision, regardless of which one they make. But what I like to do, another technique that I've employed a lot, and this technique works great in the scenario you just said, where they don't want to do something that's completely derailing, whether they say that or they're just hesitant. I will then take the often I think it's simultaneously either completely unused or the completely overused um what's the word I'm looking for? It's not aspect, but I can't think of the other word that I'm thinking of. But the another attribute that DMs have is you are the narrator. You control the story that you've built. You control the scenery. You control all of that. And as much as we have always talked about letting the players fully encompass their characters are part of that narrative, right? When you scene skip, when you fast travel, when you go from one area to the next, right? When you have a cutscene, when you have, the final blow where you take over the ending of a combat because it's over and you have some dialogue, you're essentially taking control of the characters. And we do this as DMs, sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally. But one liberty, I think that was the word I was looking for, one liberty that we have is to narrate. And narrate is not just the direction of the story, but it's setting the entire scene from the perspective of the characters. Meaning that you can roll for surprise, right? You can tell people you roll for surprise, but you don't just say, okay, you're surprised. You usually would, like, for the most DM thing, it would be like, okay, you've heard a subtle sound, and you three are so startled, you're looking around and you don't see what happens next. They didn't get to choose that. You just narrated it. Now, you don't, as a DM, most of the time, we don't think of these things as taking over the character, right? We don't think of it as controlling the character. It's just the narration. But sometimes you have to take care, or you take control. So one small aspect of that is the character's mind, their emotions, their feelings, their conscience. And this is one of the liberties that I like to take. This is one of those opportunities where I employed this technique in a lot of areas, where if I don't have an NPC, I play the player's conscience. And I think you've seen this as Dov a couple times. But if I don't want to give them a clue, but they don't want to make a decision, I will try to figure out what's causing the hesitation. Like you said, oh yeah, we really like the idea of the library. I just, it's like we've just waited so long. We really kind of need it. Like if I could just tell the player doesn't want to waste time, I'd be the conscience and go, yeah, I could totally see that. But I mean, with that conversation you recently had, you do know that preparation before this is all you have, and you guys know that you don't have any deadlines. There's no, like, you don't have to get here by a certain point, but you do know that
yeah,
without going there, you do know that you guys have faced worse. So I'm not telling them, hey, the go for the library, you're totally fine. But if I go, hey, yeah,
yeah.
you guys do know that you need to be there by sundown, and going to the library is going to kill some time. So, like, you would barely make it by sundown if you went to the library right now, but you would make it. So am I giving them a green light, go ahead? No, but I mean, like, yeah, you wouldn't, you would
Stuff can
barely make
happen.
it, but you would make it. Barely, but you would. So I'm basically telling them it's not a bad idea, but I see where you're coming from. I'm not forcing their fears to be abated, but I'm also being like, you could do it though. Or it's that whole, okay, so you guys want to do this, you want to do this. Well,
It's
you
possible, but it's
recently,
risky.
yeah, it's like you could say, hey, you recently had that fight and you just lost your best friend. Like, are you mad? Like is your character mad? You've mentioned that you're kind of irritated, right? And you're like, yeah, I'm hella mad. Be like, I mean, don't you just want to take out that anger? So like maybe would you probably go and do that fight because you're angry? Or if it's like, hey, you just lost your friend. You've literally like 2 nights ago, like the last gaming session, you said that your character like went away and basically got drunk all night. Like, are you in the shape to fight right now? Or would your character want, you know, violence, or is your character like, having a crisis? You know what I mean? Like, that's the kind of thing I do, is I will pull out the details that will either abate or reaffirm a decision the player doesn't know that they've already made, or that they don't know what they want to make. So it's like, hey, we want to go to the library, but we also have the opportunity to wing it, or we have the opportunity to go, completely just balls to the wall. And I might go in there and just be like, hey, everything you've ever done has been without plan. So, I mean, there's no reason why you guys can't handle this. Like, you totally feel that way. Like, you've never had a plan before, but this is the first time that planning is available to you. So I'll give
Would you
them.
ever interrupt a player action to present that to them? Be like, yeah, I'm gonna go do this, and be like, well, your character would likely know X, Y, and Z, just so that you're fully aware. It's like, yeah,
If
I know they'd know that, but I'm gonna do it anyways, or whatever.
I have and I will, if a few things, if a few criteria are met, because I won't do it if it's a major plot shift, right? Like, I would never turn someone away from a decision against a major plot shift. So if they're like, hey, I'm
Right.
going to take route A instead of B, the only exception, the only exception even in a plot shift situation is if I truly feel the player does not understand, or the player isn't fully aware of all the details I gave,
So
or
I'll give you a quick example. uh, there's a player that sees a suspicious looking individual, and then they make eye contact, and then the suspicious individual runs away, right? And they're like, "Oh, I chase after him," right? And there are some context clues that indicate that that was intentional and that they're trying to lead them into a trap.
gotcha.
And if, my players like automatically run into it, but again,
So yeah, I would
I
interrupt people if they were
wanna.
like, if they say I see them and I'm like, and I'm in the conversation of like, yeah, you guys lock eyes. He begins to pivot and he seems to turn away, and I have more to explain. But they're like, we're after him. Be like, okay, so you guys see him start to pivot. He's gonna run right before your foot leaves the ground. Make a perception check. So I'll prep their action like a real
Interesting.
person, right? Because they're gonna be like, he's running, and then I'm like,
Yeah,
make a perception check. So you see X, Y, and Z.
interesting.
Do you continue with your action, or do you hesitate? Because you know how people are. You might go, I gotta,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
hold on. Like, you jerk, right? A human being can jerk forward to the action and then immediately stop themselves. So yes, if I feel like the
Yeah.
action is being made without all the knowledge, I will insert a way to make sure they have it. I'll even straight up say, hey, hang on 1 second, or I'll be like, hey, make a roll to get the information I was about to give you. But I would say, okay, cool. So right as you are about to chase him, you're getting ready, you take a couple steps, but your character does see these things. And he would know this could be intentional. Like, I would absolutely throw it out there, not as a you don't want
Mhm.
to do that, but usually if they've cut me off or if they've gotten ahead of me, I'll prep the situation to like basically say, cool, you're going to do that.
Yeah.
Here's the information you need. Is your character fully still committed to this? Because I'm okay with people saying I run after him and then within half a step going to a stop. I've done that in real life, right? You're like, oh shit, I left the oven.
Mhm.
Oh
Oh yeah.
nope, I didn't do that. Like, but you need jerk flinch. So in those
I kind of
situations,
like the idea of
absolutely.
other other players being able to, like, say if they were a little impulsive, but one of the other players around them is able to like notice what's happening because they're being a little bit more patient or they're being a little bit more observant, while maybe that character is impulsive and
A
they
good
don't pay
a good
attention to that
example of
punishment.
that
So like they would know.
a good example of that too is, yeah, if you have multiple players, prepping other players, especially like, if the character is known to be impulsive, definitely a good opportunity for that. But like, again, if you have a player who failed a perception check and one who got the perception check, I would preface the second player like, hey, you see him doing this, but you notice XYZ, but you see him diving right
Hmm.
into it. I always try to use leading language without language that points in a direction, but it's like, hey, you notice XYZ, you see him running right into it. So I'm trying to basically get the player to get ahead of me and go, can I stop him? Before I ask,
Hmm.
do you want to stop him, or do you want to take an action,
Right.
or what would your character think? You see the obvious trap and you see him running right for it or about to run right for it. What would you do? Like, before I get to
Yeah.
that, I try to use language that I want my player to catch on to what I'm saying before I say it. So they're like, oh, wait, that's a trap and he's running toward it. Can I stop him? Be like, and then if they're like, oh, stop him, make a reaction roll to see if you can grab him before he runs. And then if he fails the roll, be like, you weren't able to grab him, make this roll and see if you can catch up to him before he triggers it, right? I would absolutely
So
let it,
this
but I try to get the player to get
brings
there
up
first.
it brings up a slightly different but very related point of a lot of the times when I'm in gameplay or I'm even the DM, uh, and whoever is the DM, whether me or them, are trying to set a certain scene and be like, hey, guys, this is what's happening, this is what's going on. Even after I'm done explaining it and everybody feels like they're taking actions according to what I've described, eventually somebody tries to do something. I'm like, wait, what are you trying to do? And they're like, you know how this is right here? I'm like, no, 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 that's not what's happening. This is way over here. This is, and so like there'll be times where I feel like there is a certain element of the game that is proceeding where people are on different pages.
That happens a
And
lot.
it's like, I don't, I, and it's hard because it's like, okay, how many times have you heard this sentence? Well, if I had known that, I never would have done that.
Oh yeah,
Or
no,
something like
it
that. Or
happened
if
a
like
lot when I
if I
first
was aware
started. It,
and
it, it
and
happens
and
to new
it's
DMs so often because the thing is again, it's like everything. You can when you're it's like, why do games come out with bugs, right? Why does a game developer allow a game to come out with bugs? You can't
for
test for
sure
everything.
because
You
you
can't
can't
think
think of
of
everything.
everything.
Yeah.
That's why you have game testers. You have third-party people. I will 100% admit this was a big problem for me, especially because the way I game, the no notes, my I have worked for years. I mean, 10 years at this, at High Point to get to the consistency I'm at, right? So I 100% believe or agree with you that yes, those are times are frustrating, and I've gone through many different techniques to get through that. Um, One of the things that I've learned is not a technique you should use right away. Is if you're a newer DM, you have to put your ego aside. Like, it's your game, it's your story, but you have to be willing to accept that you're going to make mistakes. No one's at fault. It's just if you can't get over that, you're going to basically tell the player they're wrong or that they should have been paying attention, and that's the wrong approach. But I'm not saying that you have to say, oh, that's totally my fault, I'm going to let you do whatever you want, because that's not fair to you.
Right.
I've done both. At first I was like, well, pay more attention, and then I realized, okay, no, I didn't say that right. And then there have been other times where I'm like, well, if that's really it, because like they're so far in, they're like, well, I had all of this stuff planned and it doesn't make any sense now. It's like, okay, well, I'll, then I would try to do things where I'm like, well, let's see how close we can get to making it work. But then there are times where
Yeah.
it's like you eventually learn and get comfortable with what you're explaining, and there's going to be a point to where you have to accept that there will not always be, but there's always going to be the chance. Like, you can never guarantee that you will always be understood. And you have to get to a comfortability. And this is the part that I say, don't do this right away. Don't get to a comfortable spot right away where you're okay just telling them, you know what, deal with it. And the reason why I say that is I'm okay doing that now because even when I do make mistakes, it's the whole, yes, I made that mistake. I'm sorry for the inconvenience and that you're current gameplay is being upheaved by it. But in the grand scheme of things, the consistency is what it is. The game is what it is. I'm sorry I didn't say that to you explicitly, but that's like complaining about a game and the way that a boss fight is because the graphics don't tell you enough about what the what the attack's about to be, right? Blaming the graphics is like, yes, but it's still part of the game. The game can't change because you weren't given all of the details because of a limitation, right? A graphics limitation not helping you identify what move is about to come next is the same as me not properly explaining it. I have only so much capacity. So to me, nowadays, I'm much more willing to be like, I'm sorry, let me re-explain everything so we are all on the same page. But no, that enemy isn't there or he did die. I'm sorry. And if they have a problem with it, I'm okay now as a DM being like, I'm sorry, but the combat is what it is and people are where they are. I'm sorry if I didn't explain that.
We gotta move forward
I can take ownership that I didn't do something for that player and I will learn from it. I'm the DM who doesn't just go, oh, sucks for you. I'm going to be like, hey, I'm sorry. Let me re-explain everything so we're all on the same page now. And moving forward, I will try to remember that was a problem. But what I'm not going to do now is basically say, oh, well, how do I make it better for you? Because at the end of the day, in the grand scheme of it, it's one encounter in one gaming session, and it's one thing that, I had all this idea. Who cares? You'll have another gaming session to do that cool thing. And how many times have the players done that to the DM? I mean, seriously, how many times do the players do things that make the DM's life a lot harder or worse, right? So when the players are like, oh, that's really upsetting to me, it's like, yeah, but you know how often you do that to me? Like, it's in the grand scheme of things, just get over it is my approach now. But I don't suggest that for new players or for new DMs. And I'm not saying you should just roll over and just let them have whatever, but you may not want to be that.
It's not a one-size-fits-all either.
Yeah.
You know, like it can be very situational. It's like, okay, well, there might be some leeway in one situation where there's practically none in another. You know what I mean?
Like I can't retcon half of a combat session. If it's the difference between,
oh, was I supposed to have a D6 or was I supposed to have a D8? Well, you were supposed to have, a D8, but you've been rolling D6s this whole time. I'm not going to give you a bunch of like back damage, but you can roll your D8 now. You know,
it's something like that, or like if you're in the middle of a puzzle,
that could go either way.
If you're like in the middle of a puzzle and you're like, oh, I wouldn't have been in this part of the puzzle had I known this. Like my character just would, like, and you can explain it. I'd be like, okay, we're not in the middle of combat. You've only taken a couple steps. Sure, we can retcon it. You wouldn't have been there. Now that there's situations where you can work with the player
as long as there's nothing like significant that happened within those few steps, for sure.
Yeah, and there's always ways in between. My advice is if you're a new DM, always new DM, veteran DM, always acknowledge the situation, right? Always, you don't have to blame yourself. You don't have to say that is my fault and feel bad, but you do just take ownership and go, okay, I get it. You didn't get the description you wanted, or whatever. I just think that in the beginning, you have to be more lenient into making amends, like not retconning the whole thing, but just being like, okay, you wouldn't have done X, Y, Z. We can't undo it all, but let's just say that, okay, maybe you wouldn't have taken that much damage and I'll let you reposition maybe one area so you're not next to this enemy, right? That you didn't realize that he was there. I'm okay making amends for certain things if I know it's my fault, which is why that's what I suggest for new DMs. Not because it's likely your fault, but if it's truthfully just you're working your mojo and you're just trying to learn your method, it's okay to be like, hey man, I'm sorry, still working on it. Let me try to appease you. But I don't suggest retconning everything and letting the player have their way. But don't, until you've gotten a point to where you're like, hey, I'm comfortable with how I DM, I make mistakes and I'm cool owning my mistakes. Once you're there, then it's your world. Then it's basically you're allowed to kind of go like me and basically be like, I'm not retconning it, but from here on out, we're going to get better. I just suggest don't do that until you're comfortable, because that can rub people the wrong way. And if you're not comfortable as a DM, if you lose players for that, or if you start to have bad relationships with players because of that, you're going to start not being as confident as a DM. You're not going to like DMing. Like for me, if I have an argument with a player, it's not going to stop me DMing. But 8 years ago.
And I do think the attitude you approach that with is very important. I think you can approach it like I don't care how you feel, or you could approach it where you're saying, "Hey, I understand how you feel, but this is where my priorities lie in this situation." And I get
Exactly.
where you're coming from. Just I think in every situation, this is just as humans communicating in general. I think too often people think it's one person or the other's responsibility to ensure communication happened appropriately.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily only the sender's responsibility, and it's not necessarily only the receiver's responsibility. It's both people's job to, like me as a player, every time I'm in a situation, I ask a stupid amount of questions to make sure that what I've understood is correct. And I don't just run around on assumptions, right?
Right.
And as a DM, I do my best to make sure that I lay out examples of what I'm trying to describe to get the best picture in my players' minds so that they don't have as many questions to ask. And so,
Right.
I want to do my best when I'm on both sides, but I also want the other person to do their best on both sides. Be like, hey, if you're one of my players, like ask me questions, like try and engage and figure out what's happening instead of just assuming it's the way you think.
Mm-hmm.
If you're my DM, uh, in whatever aspect you can, like bring me whatever information that you see as valuable for me as a player that my character would know and understand so that they have the best idea of what's happening in this moment. So, it's definitely a two-way street, I feel. You want to really, like you said, it's very much dependent upon the relationship you have with your players. A lot of people are just trying to like, steamroll over their players and be like, yo, I want what I want. But, I feel like when you have a decent group, a decent like setting for yourself, it's like you guys are all there for the same purpose. And, you guys are really trying to accomplish the same thing. So it feels a lot less competitive than it would. But I do know a lot of people who are into D&D specifically for the competitive. They're players versus the DM or DM versus the players. And
Right.
I get it, but like that's not really the type of game that I connect with as much, because then it just feels like there's a lot of animosity between the players. You know, Even when I spar as a martial artist, like I feel way more connected and have camaraderie with my opponent than I do than I've seen in some D&D games where people are sitting on supposedly to have fun with each other. You
Well, and that's
know,
and that's where it's
so
it's are you in it for your own benefit, or are you in it for everyone's benefit, right? Like, I mean, bringing up the martial arts, obviously,
yeah.
you would think martial arts is about winning, which, that in the grand scheme of things it is. But I'm not saying that you're there to help the opponent win and they're not there to help you win. But at the end of the day, you respect your opponent for the martial artist that they are, and you are hoping at bare minimum that you both walk away as better fighters. Whoever wins or loses, your
Very much
idea
so.
is not,
Very
I
much
want
so.
them to never step foot in this ring again. As a true martial artist, your idea is, I want you at your best, and win or lose, I can't wait to see you at the battlefield again, right? It's not a
It
battlefield
really
of
is
win
the
or lose
Goku
to die.
mentality.
It's I'm honored to have fought you, and I can't wait to see what you or I become after this fight. And to me, that's the DM player approach that should be there. Is, again, that's why we always say it's everyone's game. Everyone's responsible for the narrative. Everyone's responsible for the progression of the story, regardless of who created the story.
The reason why you fight, the reason why you play is huge. Like I'm not even though I desire to win, if you were to ask me why I'm entering into that match, it wouldn't be to win. It would be to get better. Right. And I think that is a big difference. It's just like, I desire to be bettered in those situations. I desire to be improved. I don't want necessarily the easiest match possible right now. I want the best match possible right now.
Right.
I would love to win that match. I would love to be able to
I
come
always
out
like
on
just the
top
Goku
based
mindset. I want you at your best. I don't just want to fight
very
you.
much
I
so.
want you at your best. I want you to make me
Yep.
try. I don't want an easy fight. I don't want an easy win, and I don't want to lose. but I want to earn this victory. And that's the thing, is like, if you can respect your opponent enough to want to earn the victory, that I think sets you apart from a conqueror versus like a respected, like, you know, general or whatever you want to call it, right? Like the most famous ones are either just the brutal conquerors who like devastated everything, or the ones who actually like wanted to earn it, right? Like they didn't want to just like underhandedly do anything. They wanted to face their opponent, earn the victory, and let everyone know. It's like the
Almost
generals
like
who
the
invade a
samurai
country, but then they
mindset.
say,
Yeah.
"Hey, let's stop the war, and you and me duel." And then we decided as a duel. Like that is
Yeah.
so much. Like, yes, it might be a life or death thing, but the point is
I don't want
if
to
they just wanted to
destroy
win,
your beautiful town.
you know, it's like if they wanted to win, they had already won. They're in your town. But the fact that he's willing to duel you for the
Hmm.
final part means that you have a chance to win. Like that's a respect on a martial art level, right? Of wanting to say, I could have won, but now I want to do this on a level playing field. And that's where I think, again,
And
DMs
it is
could definitely use that mindset of
it's
playing on the same field as your
when
players.
when you want when you want to be better, when you want others to be better, like it really changes the way in which you approach so much of what we do. Because it's like I'm not trying to prove myself better than you, cooler than you, more powerful than you, smarter than you. What I'm trying to do is challenge myself using what you know, right?
Mm-hmm.
Put myself up against you, see if uh, you have anything that I don't have, right? Do you know anything? Can you see anything? Do you have a perspective? Like, again, you and I both have said many times one of our favorite things is when our players surprise the shit out of us. When they do
Mm-hmm.
something that we never would have thought of. It'd be like, you did what now? Like, get the, like, it's so much
When I have to stand
fun
up and walk
to
away
be
from the
able to
gaming
be
table
like,
because I have to
that is,
process what the hell just happened.
yes. I'm like, no, no, you didn't. All right. But like that's that good stuff. Like that is what I look at as like the iron sharpening iron or like the betterment of me. Cause it's like, you know, when you attack your players with a mimic the first time and then they think everything's a freaking mimic, right? You know, they're always prepared, they're always looking out. But
Yeah.
the opposite is true. Like your players solve one of your problems by banishment. And you're like, really? Like you just I mean, well, it worked. Like you got me there, you know, just like I got you with the mimic, you got me with the, and so now we sit here and balance each other out. It's like, all right, now I'm gonna do something where we can't do interplanar travel, even because technically that's what banishment is. It's a lightweight teleport spell.
Yeah, it pretty much is.
It's like an against your will teleport spell. It's just like a return home, do not pass go, do not collect $200. Like if you were to do something that would dampen teleportation, boom, like you're good to go. Now let's see
Or
what you got,
you
right?
just
Maybe
you
that
know, you don't
happens
let
with the
them know that they
BBEG.
accidentally got cursed, so every time they use banish, a mimic appears. But the idea is that every time they use the banish spell, a mimic replaces one of their items at random.
Oh my gosh.
Can you imagine that
Now,
curse?
I would be very interested to hear the lore behind how that occurred, especially if it occurred from them using it in the first place.
Because I mean, just because
Um,
imagine, but you don't tell them
well,
that
that'll
that's
be
how they're cursed, right? So eventually, because they're like in that example, it's be hilarious against players who are like just super afraid of mimics. So they were always looking for mimics, right? They're always like hitting chests and everything, but what they don't know is like
Mhm.
3 or 4 items that they carry for like the last 9 gaming sessions have all been mimics. And then like you could do little things like there's one mimic who likes to eat gold and not people. So you just every time they check their coin purse, you just be like, "Oh, update it. You actually are missing like 2 gold. You're missing another gold." Just randomly have it in there, and they're just like, "Where's our gold going?" And then they find out their coin purse is mimic. So every now and again, it just like takes one of the coins just to eat.
That's crazy.
But like again, like stupid little
It's
things
a
like
nice
that
little
where
flex.
you have to outthink the players. But again, you don't want to just like outright say, "Well, I don't want you doing that anymore."
Yeah,
So you have to make something that's fun
I'm
and
gonna be right back.
engaging, but something that doesn't just outright, you know, take away what you know what you don't like about what they're doing. All right, well, while we wait for him, we have one more topic that we will get back to. This is actually, this next topic is the one I'm most looking forward to discussing. Because so far we've talked about, pretty much everything we've talked about is the pre-planning phase, right? Allowing them to, set up an ambush, set up a fortification before an attack, go get some information, prepare specifics that will be ideal for whatever encounter you're setting up. All of these things come before the combat. And again, the goal for these is to give the players more agency, to give them more opportunities to take control of the battlefield or feel like they have an input or some sort of, basically it's a way to make the combat feel in a way more dynamic, and in a way that is allowing them to not feel like they're just constantly slugging through encounter after encounter, which is just kind of being presented at them or they're just stumbling into. It gives them the feeling of control, and it gives them a little bit more, I don't want to just say straight advantage, but it gives them advantage, or has the opportunity to give them an advantage. But it gives them more of that agency to say that they affected the battle before it began. And I know as a player, that's something that I feel like happens a lot, is where it just feels like, yes, the DM's there to control everything, but it's like, I'm this great hero. Why am I always at a disadvantage? Why is the villain always at an advantage and I'm not? And I think that players just don't think like that a lot of the times. So it's good for the DMs to give them those opportunities and to give them examples of how they could do that. But it's not just that players don't think that way. I think it's also that they just don't have a lot of opportunities, right? They stumble into encounters where they had no chance of setting up an ambush, or they don't get enough information ahead of time to do the ambush. So I think that being able to give them a little bit more control over the situation and give them some more agency and feeling like they had an effect on the combat before it began, I think is a really good opportunity to empower players and to get them to to think differently. And as DMs, it gives you different types of activity, instead of always being the one to decide or to plan out your encounter. This is almost a way that they can plan the encounter, right? Like a fortified base. That you're like, hey, I'm coming in with 10 NPCs and that's my party. So you have a party, but you're like, instead of them storming the castle, you're the one storming the castle that they designed. So now you are kind of playing the reverse role. And it's like, these are those moments where I think, when I was a player, these are moments
I think that would be really cool
like,
if I just gave them a castle and some armaments and be like, all right, set this shit up and to defend from an invasion or something. I don't know. That would be way cool. That would be very interesting.
right. So yeah, so those are the things that we've talked about so far, is all the pre-planning stuff, getting information, being able to actually take control of the combat or being the ones that set it up. But this next topic is something that is going to be a little bit hard to preface, because it's a little bit of a weird way I've decided to say this. But this is another technique that I've employed before to get more from my players, and to allow them to feel like they have, again, more than just what's on their character sheet for combat. And it's basically what I like to call in-game metagaming. So normally when I talk about metagaming, I'm thinking, when I think about the bad type of metagaming, right? Because I use metagaming a lot, actually. I use this term a lot. And it encompasses one giant concept, which is discussing things that basically, metagaming is basically discussing anything your character wouldn't know. It's discussing the game beyond the session, in the session, is what I consider metagaming. So whether you're talking about the rules
Beyond
or the mechanics,
session,
or getting background that's like the DM's telling you, the player, a background of an NPC that you haven't met yet, or background that your character doesn't know, that's all metagaming. But metagaming is a spectrum. It's it's an umbrella, and it has good and bad. So I say, I look at good metagaming is talking with your DM, fleshing out your backstory, understanding more about the world and the lore and the setting and the mechanics, things that we do here on this channel, right? When we talk about High Point, that's metagaming. This is the good kind of metagaming. In my opinion, bad metagaming is when, I don't like it when you start an encounter and then the player's like, oh, you know what? I've read all about this. It has this many hit points. It's this AC, guys. It's immune to this, but yeah, it's resistant to all of this. You use that feat you have because it'll actually work against this guy because he doesn't get to save against it. You should use that weapon that you just picked up the last. So that's bad metagaming when people are using information that wouldn't be technically readily available or using information that they shouldn't technically have in context. That's like a bad metagame, right? And so there's everything in between. So when I think of in-game metagaming, what I mean by that is giving your players / their characters the opportunity to, out of combat, think up like scenarios and situations, like tactics that they can use that they've learned from other situations. Like I don't like it when you're in a combat and one of my players is like, hey man, don't forget you can do that thing. That's bad. It's like, no, that's on the player to remember that, and it's on their character to remember that. Now granted, those are those moments where I feel like in a pinch, if the character would really know better to use their special ability, I might nudge the player, but that's not other players' job, right? Like, especially in combat, you wouldn't be yelling that across the battlefield. You don't know what's going on, and I want players to have a little bit more responsibility for their actions. But let's say you're out of combat, and the players want to talk about that kind of stuff. But if it's out of combat and they're all just sitting around the campfire, well, why wouldn't me as the barbarian be like, hey, wizard, what magic can you really do? And that's just me as a player being like, hey man, what spells do you have? That is borderline. But when you're looking at it from the context of they're trying to make tactics, right? So it's like, hey, you don't ever use this spell. Like, you don't ever use that, but you have it. Well, if you were to do that, can't I use my thingamabob over here? And what if we combined those in the middle of combat? Would that work? If you're doing that in the middle of combat, that's bad metagaming because you wouldn't have that opportunity. But if the players are doing that before combat or after a combat session just ended and they're like, man, you remember when this thing just happened? Should we like do that all the time? Just that 1-2 punch combo? And this is, it's a little bit harder to facilitate, right? Like, you don't really tell your players to start doing this, but it's something that if you want to like have them sit down and be like, hey man, so like you guys have been gaming for a while, you're now level 3, have you guys thought about like working together more on the battlefield instead of just everybody attacking, right? And this can develop not only tactics where characters start to learn their feats and they start saying, hey, if this situation happens, let's do these 2 moves together. Because that way, in that next combat, it's not metagaming when they say, hey, let's do that thing. Because you allow the characters in game to pre-plan it, right? It's not like they knew this encounter was going to happen, so it's not like an ambush. But in game, they've basically said, we can do this if the moment strikes us. So that isn't necessarily metagaming if it was pre-planned and said, hey, if all the stars align, we're just going to remember this is a thing we can do. That's something that both characters and players agreed to. That's something that this is that in-game metagaming. And to me, especially for High Point, this is also an opportunity to allow for special moves and special feats. And what I mean by that is like every character has like these feats and everything, and you can like stack them and do things back and forth. But one of the things I've toyed around with is allowing them to make special moves that aren't in the book, but make sense. And allowing them to get away with things that they wouldn't normally get away with. Like maybe if 2 characters are out of initiative of each other, like they're on different initiatives, but they're in certain positions, maybe this special feat allows both of them to act on this one initiative. Like it replaces one of the characters' initiative to match. And so they can like do this move together, or kind of like how Sentinel, right? Like you have the feat
I'm
Sentinel that says if an enemy,
on...
attacks someone near you, you can attack them instead.
Yeah.
Imagine them being able to make their own versions of that together. Those are the things I'm talking about. Is like when I say in-game metagaming, it's allowing
You
their
have
characters
dynamic initiative, right?
Yes, I do dynamic initiative, so every round is a new
So
initiative.
with the dynamic initiative, how if say like I have this move set with a person, right? And I wanted to be able to like do whatever, whatever. Like I know that there are elements, there are certain people that allow their characters to hold their initiative, which basically says
Yes.
I may be at initiative point two. I'm gonna wait until initiative point five for my entire turn,
Yeah.
right? Which is very different than holding your action because, and I've always had a problem with this.
I just called
If
it
I'm
delay.
holding my
Basically, I
action,
have a
which means
hold.
I'm doing nothing on my,
I
but
do. I have
if
two
I'm
options
doing
for that.
nothing on my,
Because you have hold action, which is basically like I'm going to do this on this contingency. So you've decided what you're going to do, but you're not doing it right now. Then there is a delayed action. So you can say I'm going to delay acting, which basically in game is you saying I'm just watching until another initiative. And I could either say you're just going to delay to a specific initiative, like hey, I'm going to delay till this character's initiative, or
so yeah, here's what I'm talking about because there's a lot of the times where it's if I technically rules is written if I want to hold an action, whatever my action is, I have to use my reaction to do so. And I'm not sure. Actually, I think you can. I think you can. The only thing you would really lose is multiple attacks with an attack action if you're a fighter or
yeah,
something of that nature. If you're doing a held action, you would only get one
yeah.
of your attacks. But um when you want to move your whole turn to a certain point in the round, would that be required for them to do whatever combo move, or could they supposedly hold an action, hold the piece of that combo move for that initiative
It,
using their reaction or whatever the case may be?
I mean, you know me. When it comes to high point, it all depends. Like, it really just depends on what's being created. And this is why I'm offering, like, the
Yes.
in-game metagaming is basically two parts. One, it's allowing the characters to work with each other because there's a lot of times where people will like talk about the things but they won't actually like set up a game plan on how to actually use them in combat until it comes up. So the in-game metagaming idea is to allow them to do the things I wouldn't let them do in the moment before or after a battle, right? So setting up certain combo moves or setting up, certain situations where like, hey, because like in second edition, right, you can get, you can flank and get advantage on attacks because you're providing you're making them at a disadvantage for being on both sides. So things like that, right? Like being able to
Hmm.
specifically position yourself and know, hey, if we're in a battle and we're fighting three people, stand on my left. If you can get your character on my left, we can do this combo move, right? Or we'll do this. Like those are the things where that's an in-game metagame. You're pre-planning something where it's not a guaranteed situation, but in the moment when you're like, hey DM, we're gonna do that move we talked about, it's not a metagame. You're not meta something that your characters shouldn't know. You've pre-planned it to implement it. That's one aspect of it. The other aspect is definitely much more up to the of other every DM, which is do you want to allow them to create like special move sets? I love this idea. I love allowing them. Now, granted, I wouldn't allow them to basically just make an infinite number, but in certain situations, I would allow them to say, "Hey, if these criteria are met, we're within 2 initiative points of each other, and an enemy is in between us. Can the first person, you know, the first person of the two of us in initiative, if they initiate this action, like I would like again, I would say, hey, if you're within like 2 initiative points and you have a like a 1-2 combo where like the barbarian picks up like the tiefling or whatever and throws him on top of a guy and then he starts grappling, I would say, hey, if the tiefling is within 2 initiative points behind the barbarian, like the barbarian's going to go first, I would say that the barbarian can pick up the tiefling, throw him, and then the tiefling can then start taking its turn. Because imagining if, in initiative, the idea is that it's your reaction, right? It's like how long it's taking you to react to the dynamicism of the combat. So you're just going to react a little bit longer. It's going to take you longer to react to the situation than the barbarian. But I could justify, hey, because the barbarian picked you up and threw you at an enemy, you're going to react a lot faster now because you're suddenly in the air. Whereas before you were reacting to being you know what I mean? Like I could say your special move
Right,
allows
right.
you to pick up the tiefling while you're raging, throw him at an enemy, and that tiefling can now take his turn simultaneously, meaning you can grapple, you can make the guy go prone, but that's like a special move, right? So if the
So,
criteria
but you wouldn't
is,
let that happen if it was like, hey, the barbarian's first in initiative and the rogue is like sixth in initiative.
it'd be like that would be too much, right? Like maybe that's too much of a split. Again,
Right,
it's
right,
all
right.
dependent upon what they're
I see
trying to
what you're
create. Because
saying.
what I'm trying to, what you have to balance is you don't want them just making up OP moves where it replaces all of their
Mm,
current skill sets and their move sets. But
yeah.
if they can come up with a situation that happens regularly, like, hey man, look, you're always in the background, so you're never near us. But like, if it always ends up that the two main fighters are always side by side in combat, it just always ends up that way, and there's always something that happens that's like, man, if we could just like use this to our advantage, or if we could stop this from happening, we'd actually own battles more. If they could come up with a unique way, I want them to be able to implement it, but I want those criteria to where I don't want it to just be a I'm first initiative, they're 10th in initiative, but we're going to go at the same time because of this special move. And it's like,
Hmm.
no, because initiative really is your mental awareness state and how quickly you're going to react to the dynamicism. So if you say, hey, if we're within 1 or 2 initiative points, maybe it makes sense that something could jolt you into reacting faster, like being picked up and thrown through the air. But if you're so far that you're just in that moment, you're going to lag behind, being picked up and thrown would almost, in my mind, confuse you more. So therefore, you wouldn't get the specialty
Mm.
because you are so focused and just trying to collaborate what's happening on the battlefield that being thrown just fried you. And you're like, shit, now I'm in a new position. Now I have to reassess. So you could do things like that where maybe, again, and this is another option, maybe the criteria is to do it successfully, you need to be within 2 initiative points. For every initiative point beyond that, if you try it, it will get progressively worse. Like if you're within 3, maybe you throw the tiefling and he goes prone next to the enemy. But if it's like 10 apart, right? Like if the barbarian was first and they're 10th, maybe not only do you throw them and they go prone, but maybe they take damage and they're dazed for 1 round. Like they can't take their next turn because they're just so frazzled, right? So it's like you could make these situations to have good and bad outcomes depending on when the characters tried to justify when they could use it, right? So you could say, sure, you could use it outside of the 2 initiative points, but it's not going to have the same outcome because they're not going to be on the same wavelength as you, right? Because you can make that justification. If we're in the middle of battle and we're trying to sync up our moves, if you're too far out of initiative, you're not going to be on the same wavelength, right? You're not going to be on the same page in battle. So you guys won't do that eye to eye. Now's that moment, bro. Like,
There's definitely a lot to be said for timing, that's for sure.
and you could say things like, hey, if you got, like, again, you could go even one step further. If the player's like, hey, we want to do this special move, can we, like, just have, like, a signal, like an eye movement that we just do? Like, cool. And then next time you're in battle, they could be right next to each other. But let's say they just happen to be facing enemies that are facing away from each other. So they were like, hey, bro, we're right next to each other. Let's do the move. And it's like, you guys aren't making eye contact. You specifically said you need to be able to see each other. And they're like, but can't we learn to turn around? I'm like, both of you want to turn around? Just in the middle of battle, you're going to both face away from your enemy? So balancing, right? You can add those extra layers depending on what kind of DM you are, of making sure that it's not abusable, but you're allowing them to come up with more than, again, because and the reason why I like this idea, the reason why I'm pushing the idea of like an in-game metagame and letting them make even special moves is not to, again, continue the idea of homebrewing, but combat is kind of boring. Like in D&D, I love combat in D&D, but it's because I was taught with my DM and my gaming group all those years ago. They were very big on making it more customized, like what we said really mattered with my DM. And that's what I want to bring in, because a lot of the times I feel like yes, every time you level up you get something new, but it's still just a list of things you can do. And you can only, depending on the DM, you can only, you know, combo them in so many different ways to make it more unique, until the end you're just deciding. And come on, let's all be honest, we've all had that combat session where you're just literally going down the list from most powerful attack to least powerful. in order of how often I can, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, how many, like, I'm not saying we always do this, but how many times, I mean, at least once you've been a wizard and just were like, I'm just going to throw the most powerful spell and then the next most powerful, and I'm just going to go down until I have no more spells left. Or you're the fighter and you're like, I'm just going to use these moves that are just the most like, you might have all these cool things, but why do a cool thing that does 1d4 less damage? You know, and that's what I like with these opportunities is it brings back the creativeness of combat, because I do feel in my experience more times than not combat is the one thing that does not feel unique from gaming session to gaming session. If I'm being completely honest, whenever I've been a player, I don't know if I could pinpoint very, very specific, unique combats that I remember. You know what I mean? I may have been a different player, a different character, different movesets, different weapons, but I'll tell you right now, the combats I remember that I was a player for were never just, all right, I swing. Okay, I do my cunning action. No, all of the ones that I remember were ones where we had to think outside the box and do things that weren't standard actions. And to me, that's one of the downsides of D&D is the rules as written make for a lot of variety, but fundamentally combat, the variety of combat is only in, oh, you're an echo war, you're an echo knight, right? So you have like a shadowy character next to you, but that's not much different than me having 2 attacks per round. You know what I mean? Like feeling wise, it's still just getting 2 attacks, 2 dice rolls, and deciding, am I doing a lot of damage or am I doing debuff damage, right? Like giving players opportunities like this, I think, spice it up because it lets them do things that are not in the book. And again, it's not about homebrewing. It doesn't even have to be like an attack, right? But it could just be a, hey, can I get advantage on my attack if we both do this one thing? Or, hey, can we maybe, it's like maybe one of those things where, hey, if next time we're in combat, if we're flanking an enemy, right? If I'm on one side and he's on the other, can we have a move where if one of us attacks and it doesn't kill the guy, but the next person's going to have initiative later, after our attack, can we get on our hands and knees and allow the other person to attack and push so they go prone? Like, that's not a big deal, right? That's like a small little funny thing. But the idea of allowing them to do that's not in the book. You can't do the joke thing where someone gets behind someone's legs and you push them over. But imagine being able to do something that ridiculous in combat where you're like, you slash the guy and immediately hit the ground, almost, like vertical fetal position. And then the next round, you use a bonus action to basically like attack and then kind of like not kick as in like damage kick, but do the whole, like I put my, foot on his, like on his belt and just push him just to knock him over, ally. Like something silly like that. But it would make a much more dynamic combat than just trying to say, I try to knock him prone, right? That feels different than having this giant setup that the players created and found a way to implement in combat when it works, right? Like, now they may go out of their way to be like, okay, let's try to flank every enemy and use this on every enemy. That would be a little bit much, but hey, gameplay is gameplay, right? Everyone has fun. But the idea that you can let them create these move sets that are non-standard, don't necessarily work all the time, but I think it's better doing it this way because especially the idea for me with this in-game metagaming is you're fostering more teamwork between the players instead of letting them become individually more powerful, right? It's not like a homebrew feat where they get to do something really spectacularly cool. Essentially, the reason why I like the idea of special moves is because you're encouraging teamwork. You're saying, yes, I will give you guys something special as long as you're working together. As long as the team is, you know what I mean? Because how many players do that where they're like, oh, I want this really cool thing just for me, just so I can do it. How does that benefit the team? Well, I can do more damage. And it's like, okay, yeah, but you're just making yourself sound more cool. Your character just looks more cool. I like the idea of rewarding them for saying, hey, we are going to do this thing and the team is going to benefit from it, right?
Right.
So yeah, those are. I mean, I would love to know if, like some other ideas that you might have in terms of like either these topics or any other ones to help like give more of that like more control back to the players, right? Like let the players feel like they have more control than just I'm surviving and trying to kill these things, right? Um, but those are the ones that I wanted to talk about because
Um,
those are really like,
I definitely like that mentality. I think definitely encouraging teamwork. I love the idea of you know basically like unique tag team move sets. Think about those old not old those tag games that you have where you can do like depending on who's next up in your queue, you'll do like a different move as you switch out between them, like that type of mindset where you just like tag team and launch somebody and whatever the case
oh,
may be,
dude, you just gave me a
um
great idea. Imagine this. So like in I think like Street Fighter versus Capcom or Marvel versus Capcom. I think they did it first, but where you had like you could you select like three characters for the fight, but then you can swap them out like mid fight. Imagine being able to do that in like
that's
combat
exactly what I was
where
referring to.
yeah, so it's like
That's
imagine being in
exactly what I
combat
was
where it's
talking
like
about.
if
Just
you have like if my microphone's the enemy, right? Like let's like this is the enemy. You have a player here and then another player here, and like they were just over here fighting like an enemy like this direction. Imagine being able to have them have an extra move where they can like attack the this enemy and then they switch places. Like that's the move set that they do where they can like in the middle of an attack they can like switch places.
interesting.
So if one's going down in HP, they could basically like swap in order to like
Right.
protect. So things like that would be really cool that I want to like give my players opportunities for because like again it just feels like rewarding them to be more of a team and be more of a party and work together. That's I think what is also missing in the standard D&D rule set, right? You have inspiration for when someone plays their character, their background, right? Like that's what inspiration is for. The DM guide says to give it to people who play their information. XP is personalized. Gold is practically personalized. Like there's nothing really in D&D designed to directly encourage and reward the teamwork. You know what I mean? And I think that's where just us as DMs could do a lot better. Like, how do you reward? Like, actually, that's a great topic. Like, that's a good question for you. How do you reward teamwork usually? Like, what is something that you do when you see like your players really going out of their way or just surprising you with the way that they've come together? Is there anything that you do specific to reward that?
Honestly, my my favorite reward, just in general in the game, is making shit work. Like, to be honest, like that to me is one of the best aspects of the game and the best moments where I see my players' faces get really excited or light up or whatever the case may be. I love letting their shit. Like one of my friends or one of my players had a grappling hook for like the entire game and like almost never used it, but like at this one very pivotal point, like she pulled it out and she wanted to use it to basically, like they were in this tournament and they needed to like grab this crown and it was like getting thrown through the air and she wanted to use this grappling hook to come and like snatch it out the air, and it was such an epic move that it worked like perfectly.
That's awesome.
And when you have the idea, when you have the ability to like go out and be different for whatever reason, and like I can find a way to make it work. Like in my head, I'm like, I love this idea. I have three different ways it'll work, because and I struggle with this sometimes. Like, to me, I'm gonna reward you for just thinking of the idea.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna make you roll to see how great that reward is, right?
Yeah,
And I know a lot of people will, oh, you rolled poorly. I'm like, oh, listen, just because you rolled poorly doesn't mean you don't succeed. It's like, hey, it might not be as extravagant as you thought it was, but you still made that mess work. You still got there. You still did the thing, and and even if it was one of those situations, like, because I dislike making low rolls strictly look like the player did poorly,
yeah.
right?
No, I
Like there are
100%
some
agree.
times where it's like it's fine as like a consequence, like if you're like being a douche or if you're like being rude or like something like that, like maybe I'll make you look like a fool. But but the majority of the time, I like you guys are expected the mindset is you guys are the cool guys, you guys are the heroes, you know. And sometimes when you watch your shows, like the hero will look a little goofy, but for the most part, they're the freaking hero. They're the cool one. They're the ones that you see yourself as, the ones you want to emulate. Oh, that's my favorite character. I want to be just like X, Y, and Z, right? And so I want these players to feel like they are those people. And so if I'm going to reward them, like especially for doing something cool and creative, like what you're doing is you're enriching my world by doing this cool stuff, right? This now gets to be a part of the world that everybody else gets to interact in, and all these things get to become lore and real. And that's the gift you're giving me. So I would love to give you the gift of being able to bring more of that to my world, especially if you enjoy it. You know what I mean? So, um,
I don't think you could have put that any better though. Like I was trying to figure out how I wanted to answer this question because that's why I want to ask you first. But really, I think you just nailed it on the head with that. I think that as DMs, one of the best rewarding tools that you have, one of the best the rewarding systems that you have at your disposal is approval, like allowance, right? Like you may have reasons to not allow something. It may be against a certain mechanic. It may be something that you just don't like the idea of, but knowing that that's what the character, what your players are trying to accomplish and understanding why they're trying to accomplish it. It's not just like I want to accomplish it for this in-game reason, right? But a lot of the times the players are coming up with these ideas because they think it looks cool. They want to finally like have, they want to feel like they were beneficial. And like you were saying, it doesn't always have to be a straight failure, but it also doesn't have to be a straight success. But the idea of allowing them to do it and not outright just saying, no, you can't have that, but making it work for them to feel like they accomplished something, right? Like the feeling of accomplishment, especially for players in D&D, I think is one of the greatest reward systems, because really at the end of the day, the rest of it's all numbers. It's all just numbers and text on a piece of paper, right? It doesn't really matter how much XP you give them, because that's a guarantee. XP and gold and equipment, all of that comes with the game of D&D. But personal accomplishments, being able to do something that was not pre-written or in the book, or like you said, I know how to use this grappling hook, but to use it in such a clutch moment, even though they've never touched it before. Like, even I've learned, even just letting them try it, whether it's super difficult, just letting them try it is just a reward in and of itself, because they feel like they've understood the game to the point to where it's like, oh, I can do that. I'm understanding how this works, right? It doesn't matter how difficult it is, but letting them do it makes them feel like they finally have a grasp. Because every time they try to do something, you say, yeah, you can't do that. Think about what that's telling them. It's, nope, you can't do that. You don't understand how to play. Nope, you don't understand the mechanics. Nope, you don't know what you're doing. But if you're like, give it a try, even if it's difficult, even if you tell them, okay, it's going to be pretty hard for your character to pull this off, but you know what? Like, let's go. Like, I want to see you try that. And you also hit another point too. You don't ever want the dice to just straight up say, yeah, you can't, or you didn't. But this is where I think is a strengthening point for all DMs. And it goes back to what we said before earlier about narrative, right? We are the narrators. It's our job to paint the scene. It's our job to really give the players and the characters the perspective. And this includes, their emotions. This includes their visuals. It includes everything. So one thing that I've tried to get better at over the years, and one thing that I know every DM can get better at, because I have yet to meet a DM, even my previous DM, I would say this is one of the areas that he lacked in, is the narration of what you just said. The narration difference between success, or basically the different ways to narrate failure. And like, I want to attack someone. I roll a 14, or I roll to hit them, and I roll one less than their AC, so I miss, right? My biggest thing about that is, like, whether I missed by 1 AC or by 10 AC, more times than not, it's I didn't hit him. right? And a lot of the times that's a metagame thing that we say, oh, it didn't hit, like, because you just, that's the mechanical concept. But what DMs can do, and what DMs very rarely do, and even what I rarely do, because, you're in the more of the moment, you were thinking more of the mechanics and the flow of the game, but we can be so much better at describing what real combat looks like. A non-hit in D&D does not necessarily mean a miss. And if you've ever watched real combat, right? Like boxing, SCA tournament fights, martial arts, usually most games that are fighting are based around points, right? In the real world, the sport is based around accumulation of points. In D&D, it's a reduction of points. But in the end, it's about points. And in every contact sport, from boxing to martial arts to tournament fighting in the SCA with full-on real armor, there are some no-point hits. I mean, I've been in a tournament and watched a tournament where you heard the clang, you felt the reverberation of someone smacking steel with a giant piece of wood, and it doesn't count because it's either an illegal hit, or it glanced off, or it wasn't powerful enough, or it broadsided because all the weapons actually have sides. So there's reasons why a actual hit could be a non-pointer. And this is where I think we as DMs lack in the narration of combat, is how many times you say, okay, you don't hit them. What we really are saying is that you are not reducing their HP. You are not making the fight more difficult for them now. But that doesn't mean you missed. Not hitting someone's AC is everything from whiffing to glancing off their armor to hitting the wrong piece of armor. Like, to hitting them with the wrong part of your sword. Like, it is absolutely 100% possible to hit someone with the flat part of your sword by accident. That right there could be like, oh yeah, you come down and you smack your sword right across their chest, but at the last moment your grip slightly shifted and you saw the blade hit him flat and just go bing, and then just you see and then you can even say, like, as it flashes off, you see for a quick moment your blade flex and then comes back to be straight, right? These are things that we could do to get rid of the stigma of a missed roll as a miss. And that is where I think we as DMs, the game itself has not prepared players properly to understand that, like, it sucks when you miss the roll. But what I think you're talking about is, like, how do we alleviate the idea that a missed dice roll is a flat out failure? And it comes down to the narration, because not every, like, so what I talked about before, like, I've talked about this on stream before, where how I do like skill checks, right? And how it's a gradient. So even though second edition rule sets say if your strength is a 14, and as long as you roll under a 14, you succeeded, as long as it's not a 1, which is a crit fail. So anywhere from a 2 to a 12, or 2 to a 13, all of that is a success. But if you roll a 2 versus exactly your 14, I'm going to give you a different outcome. Both are going to succeed. You are going, if you're trying to unstuck a door, both are going to get you towards the goal you want, but they're going to be completely different things, right? Like, one, like if you roll a 2, you're going to maybe unstick the door because, you succeeded, but maybe it's going to be loud as fuck and you're going to let everyone know that you just creaked open that stuck door, right? Maybe it's going to clang and bang or, creak and all of that. Whereas if you had a better strength check, maybe you just were able to, like, lift it off the ground that it was dragging on, kind of like a door off its hinge, and you just slightly open it up, right? So you both opened it, but the outcome was slightly different. And I think that we can just, as DMs, do a lot better, especially in combat, where not every bad roll is a miss or a failure. It's just an unintended outcome. And that is, I think, if we can, as DMs, do better with that, with explaining unintended outcomes, that, I think, is a lot more fun.
I think a lot of that comes down to awareness, because, unfortunately, our brains are wired to, like, go straight to the negative, right? Oh, you didn't pass, you failed, you didn't do the thing, and our brains automatically go to, well, how did you fail? Because you, and so it's that association. So it's just shifting our awareness to, like, all right, well, the check failed, not you failed, but like, hey, this attempt to accomplish this goal failed, not you failed necessarily. And it's so much fun too, because
it's
really just a shift.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I said it's really just a shift in mindset so that you think about the situation differently and therefore approach it very differently.
Yeah. And it's that thing too where it's like it could also maybe even create more dynamic gameplay because maybe your description gives them an idea, and this is where the DM like has full creative authority. If you set this battle up to be, in a field at early dawn and you mention that there's fog, next time they miss a thing, be like, oh yeah, the mist is so thick and your grip, you're not used to fighting this early in the morning with the dew around. Your grip is a little bit slippery in your gloves, because with fog and mist, it's wet. Or you could say, something stupid as you go to swing, and that in that moment you realize your shoulder pad is too tight, and you couldn't bring your arm up in the full motion. And in that, hesitation, the enemy was able to step out of the way, or, you didn't get the full swing. So even though you connected, it didn't seem like it did any damage to him. So again, when someone misses a roll, don't just say you missed. Be like, oh, you connected, but you connected broadly with their armor and it did exactly what it was supposed to do, right? Like you hit him with a sword and it's plate armor, it's going to bounce off. Like there's so many ways to explain why it didn't do damage, not why you didn't hit them. And that's the difference, is if you got to explain why it's not doing the intended effect. And I've done actually one of my favorite ones that I did, which is really interesting because it's one of those like, it's a long game thing. But one of my players was in a fight and the enemy, did a really bad roll, but, it was kind of like a twofer. So the enemy was doing bad, but kind of got lucky on a multi-attack. And there was a couple other, like, I'm trying to remember the entire situation, but it was like, there was a lot, like, of course it was a player who was very creative in my realm. So they were just doing a lot of interesting things, but it was one of those situations where it's like, I didn't like it wasn't supposed to be a proper full on hit. In terms of like, it wasn't a great one, but I wanted to kind of like bridge that gap with, it wasn't a miss, they're going to get hit, but it's not a great hit. So what I actually did was I made it to where the enemy hit them broadsidedly with their blade. So they just, they hit flat side, but their character wasn't wearing armor. So I had him hit him in the ribs. Like I actually hit him like right in the side, and it's like, but you hit it flat side. So they didn't cut you, they didn't stab you. And you could tell, I was like, and you could tell that would have been a killing blow. As hard as they hit you. But I did have them suffer for pain for several days afterwards. Like their in-game character would actually suffer pain, had limited movement, had limited attacks for several days in-game. What the player didn't know, and still doesn't know to this day, is that they broke a rib. I didn't tell them that because they had no way of knowing. But in my mind, I was like, oh yeah, this sword is going to fucking just smash that rib just right off. And that's where they got the pain and all of that. They never ended up having it looked at, so they never found out it was broken. But this is where me as a DM, it was kind of just a unique way of allowing that combat to flow out. Because that's another way that I think what ended up happening, and it was a good hit, but they were doing some really creative things to make the combat very dynamic, but the damage die was really low. So it was like a super hard hit, but a low damage dice. So for me to justify how low damage they took, the blade hit them broadside. So this is another way of doing that, right? Like, how do you justify when someone says, oh, I got a 19, 1 damage? How do you justify that? And I think that's what ended up happening. I think the enemy did a good hit, but had shit damage. So in my mind, I was like, well, how does that make sense? How does this sword make 1 damage make sense? And that was what I did. It's like, oh, they hit you broadsided with their blade, but it gave you a couple points of damage. It didn't give you a lot of damage. Could have been a lot worse. But what was cool is they don't know that their rib is broken. And all of this time, I've kept that in the back of my mind. Now, it's not a big thing, but I've thought multiple times, because I don't let details go. I've thought about so many different ways to use that to both their benefit and their detriment in a future gaming session, because they don't actually know. I told them the whole description. I told them that their entire side was bruised. I gave them all the descriptions of a broken rib. They just never got it confirmed. But now, for the rest of their gaming session, for the rest of that character's life, I've always had, I think that this happened like a couple of years ago, and I've always had it in the back of my mind that rib is broken, because there's going to be a point whether it's a, you know, they need like a benefit, or they use a DM point or an inspiration to like gain an advantage, or something really like a bad roll happens and they need a reason to fuck up something. A broken rib can pop up in many different ways, right? There's so many different ways a broken rib can just manifest good or bad. And these are the things where it's like, I didn't have a plan. When I broke the rib, I didn't say I'm going to break this rib because this is what I need her rib broken for.
Yeah.
It was just how do I justify a low point of damage for this hit? But it gave me something that I had to keep in mind, right? And it's just, those are the fun ways that it's like, I like to look at how do you justify these things. So again, a low die roll doesn't mean a miss, and a low damage roll doesn't have to feel frustrating, right? You know, if someone does a low damage roll and you're just like, let's say you're a DM and someone, you know, gives a really high, you know, attack, but a really low damage roll, and you kind of feel bad. Maybe that maybe they've been doing everything they could. Maybe their die is just hating them that day. Like every single time they do damage, it's just a low roll. I know this isn't like, again, it's not necessarily Deus Ex Machina but if it's just one of those things where, again, it can be justified, why does a low roll have to just mean, oh, you're barely doing damage? Why not say throw something dynamic like, oh, you got a low damage roll but a really high number? Well, your sword comes down, it doesn't quite break the leather through their gloves or through their gauntlet, but it does seem like it hurt them enough to drop their weapon, and then now they're disarmed. You know? Or you hit them and it looks like their arm is now weaker. Now you can now have that person have disadvantage with that arm or with that weapon. Like, so you know,
or you kick them in the leg really hard and now their movement speed's reduced,
and
or
that's
whatever.
The thing. It's like we can do so much better with the narrative. Like, you know, I think a lot of us also think of like, the more HP you have, the less likely bad things are to happen to you, right? Like, oh, you only did 1 point of damage and, you know, they have like more than 80% of their life. But that 1 point of damage could be detrimental in a way, right? Like if I were to do that 1 point of damage, but that 1 point of damage took off their pinky toe, that's detrimental to their stance. That's detrimental to their movement. It's detrimental to their balance. Like, this is where I encourage us as DMs, and I say that as us, me included, because I don't do this myself as well as I talk about it, but allowing that narrative to go beyond, like what you were saying, just the hit and miss, the black and white, right? Like, yes, you still have to hit their AC to hit to hit their HP, but that doesn't mean that everything below that is just a whiff and you just hit air. You know what I mean? Not every enemy is a ninja that just, you know, dodges all of your shit. Sometimes the armor takes it, you know? Sometimes it just, you know, you broadside them. Sometimes you miss. Sometimes they parry you. A missed attack can simply be a parry that the enemy just swung you to the side. But we have it, like you said, we have it so stuck in our head that it's a miss. I had nothing to do with it. I had no way of controlling it. And that's where we get into those spirals of combat gets boring. Because when you start to realize that combat is just, I choose the potential damage, but this dice is going to decide whether or not I get to do it. Because that's really all attacks are, right? If you really wanted to boil it down, all attacks are I want to choose from a list of potential damage and then roll this magical one dice to see if that damage even happens, right? And that's it. But to make these situations feel more alive, to give them these more descriptions, to make them feel like they're not the ones at fault. And if you're a DM that can do this, you allow those descriptions to also shape the battle, right? So don't just say, hey, you know, you keep clanging off his armor. If you keep saying that every time they clang off their chest because they have breastplate, let them do a called shot. Like, if your players are going to be like, fine, I go for their fucking legs. Be like, oh, they weren't expecting that. I'll give you advantage because you were just like 3-4 times in a row you're going for his chest and you suddenly sweep his legs. Get advantage, right? Like, you don't have to turn the tide of the battle because they're losing or because they're winning, but you can make that dynamic call based on the knowledge that you have. It doesn't just have to be a straight, I've designed this battle, here are the enemies, here are the players, just do your straight dice rolls, right? allow that combat to evolve and let everything that's said evolve it somehow, right? You don't have to use every last detail, but keep it in your back pocket, right? Those are the times where you can make that combat feel like it's more, I don't want to keep saying dynamic. Like, you can make the players feel like they have more control in combat if they're allowed to do those creative things, right? If they have those opportunities. And, you know, you don't want to abuse it. You don't want them to always do specialty stuff. But I think that there's a good opportunity here for us to show that, like, as DMs, to show players that the opportunity exists.
Hypothetically speaking, if it made sense for the scenario, for every round in a specific combat for a certain character, for them to do something creative and, air quotes, not by the book, even though it's, I guess you could say, seems excessive, is that something that's valid enough to be okay? Meaning, it's like, okay, you're doing something that's like not on your combat list every single turn. You want to do some crazy weird move, you want to do some gymnastics, but like with the situation we're in, with what we're happening, like we are doing some Mario platformer type stuff, so it makes sense that you would need to like hop around quite often, and you technically could use these things very effectively. So is it something that you say, like, takes away from battle if it's done too much, or takes away from the experience of other players if it's done too much?
Yes. To flatly answer it, yes. I think it can be detrimental if it's too much. Now, early on, I had some difficulties balancing that out and deciding how much. Again, where the very you know, the very beginning, very first war of High Point, the War of Power. It's where, you know, I allowed too much to happen, and I had to start making those rule sets. I do believe it can be done too much. Now, breaking down what you said, if it is just a situation where it could make sense, or it's just like, hey, you know what, you're just doing it for this one combat. It's, you know, you're having fun. We're all having fun. I'm okay with it, right? But the way that I decided to balance it, because I did think about this a lot, about how do I balance basically playing D&D versus essentially just playing my own homebrew, right? Because if you do that, if you allow too much outside the book, you're not really playing D&D at that point, right? Like, you're just playing a narrative-based game. You're playing a tabletop, which is fine. But I wanted to be rooted in D&D. Like, I wanted my referencing, my standards, my foundations to be rooted. So my solution to that is, A, like what you said, in context, in certain situations, I fully allow it. Even though I hold it as a mindset that too much is too much of a good thing is bad. So yes, I still believe it can be overdone. I think in context, in certain isolated situations, you can do it as much as you want without it being too much, right? But the way that I truly balanced it in my world, which you've seen multiple times and we've talked about on and off stream, is that right there was one of the first major reasons that got me to start creating what I call roleplay classes. Because I got to a point to where it's like, I don't mind allowing players to do this once in a while in context in certain situations, or just out of the blue, you know, when it's fun. But I did think about those times where I'm like, there are players who just want to play like that. And I wouldn't mind if a player came in and said, hey, I want to play a fighter, but I kind of don't really want to be a fighter. But a lot of the times then you start to run into well, if you're going to do this, why weren't you just a monk instead of a fighter? Or why didn't you just play a rogue and multi-class with this, right? Like, if you can start to find other ways that could have been done by the book, that's when I started feeling like, man, how do I really balance this out? Like, how do I allow a player who really wants to just see what High Point has to offer on all levels without all of the restrictions? And that was one of the major pushes. Beside that and me wanting to break out magic, those were pretty much the two number one reasons. Well, and the third reason being I had to break out music, right? So being able to separate magic, being able to separate music from it all, and wanting the opportunity for those players who just really want to see and test High Point to its extent. But it's like players like you, why we created Dovd in the first place. That is why I created classes that are what I call roleplay classes. Classes that aren't defined by a set standard of how to play, but are set by each individual player. Like the player decides how to play that class, and then the next player to play that class, I have a general idea of some benchmarks, but that player gets to custom create it, right? Like the next earth bender I have in my realm isn't going to automatically get that parkour benefit that you do, right? Dovd has the benefit of the parkour.
Yes.
That ability to, what we created Dovd, where he can lift up dust and feel where dust doesn't move, so he can feel footprints and objects in other rooms by just lifting dust up and being able to feel where the disturbance is and is not a standard earthbender tool. That is not something that every earthbender in my realm will just automatically have at 3rd level. That is a Dovd specific earthbender tool. Now, can other earthbenders do it? Absolutely. But the bending classes were not designed to have those, here are the abilities you're going to get. Because earthbending doesn't really work that way. Not every earthbender, you learn some of the basics, but you don't all learn the same exact movesets. You learn how to communicate with your magic and how to represent it in your way. It becomes customized. And I felt like D&D doesn't have any of that in terms of classes, right? You have all these subclasses, you have all these ways to combine and multi-class, but there's no way to truly make it yours. That's why I wanted to do roleplay. So yeah, in full answer, I do believe doing that too much is a bad thing. I also believe that in isolated situations, it's not a problem. But in order to bridge both of those ideas, I created a whole new type of class that is purely a high point idea, which is a roleplay class. There's, most of my magic classes that I created are exactly that, roleplay classes. They are designed to be individually understood by each player, not written out and have a static, this is exactly what's going to happen. And part and partial, it's because I think that's more fun, it's more dynamic, and it makes, for a player like yourself, after a while, after you've played so long, you want something that's just new. And what more new is something that you have to basically play with in order to figure out.
At some point, you mentioned to me about mutants in your realm.
Yes.
Is that accurate?
Mm-hmm.
And how they're like similar to the X-Men vibe, but not exactly. And it's not exactly magic. It's more closer to like E or Super Saiyans.
Yeah, those are. I still haven't finalized a lot. That's actually been one of the ones that's taken me years, and I still haven't worked it out exactly how I want to do it. But the idea of, it's kind of like a natural. It's like a natural version of the D&D sorcerer. An innate level of magic, but you're not a magic user. You have an innate ability. Now, some of those abilities are of a magical nature. I think I'm heavily leaning more towards mutants because I like the idea of it being a natural byproduct of yourself. But instead of it being a warlock where you have a pact, or a sorcerer where you have just some ancient bloodline of a wizard or something, I was trying to think how do these things physically manifest, right? That aren't static and not consistent. And so I started thinking, well, I have a very, very extensive Fey realm between, the D&D lore as well as the Dresden lore. So why can't mutants basically just be descendants of people who had sexual run-ins with the Fae? And that's mostly where I lean. It's not 100% where I want to go with it yet, but mostly what I've been testing out is basically the idea that these are natural occurring things that will randomly happen, but the source is somewhere in your lineage. A very mutated Fae got into your, family, and you have a great grandparent that is actually a Fae creature. It doesn't have to be some great, powerful, it could just be a regular, everyday Fae, but that little bit of magic, every now and again, just the right things happen in the universe, the stars align, and something gets clicked. And now you can change color like a chameleon. Just cause. So it's basically like a part Fae is where I'm kind of leaning.
I had an idea for you a while back And we talked about it briefly, but now that you're describing what a role play class is, it makes me feel like this would be much more along those lines. This is the idea of a class or a character that had the ability to control portals. And it like scaled as, you level up and whatnot. You can do bigger portals, further away portals,
Mm-hmm.
things of that nature. But generally speaking, it was like that was the thing they could do. That was the only thing they could do. And it
Yeah.
wasn't like, oh, you get to have these other cool abilities. No, you can just mess with portals. But how you use those portals is up to you. If you want to be creative with it, if you want to whatever. But like outside of that, like you got portals. Like, you might be able to eventually make more of them. You might be able to eventually make bigger ones, but at the end of the day, it's gonna be nothing but that. So, I was interested in that, but I feel like when we talked, it was gonna be something that was gonna be kind of hard to play in. I feel like you said in a group setting, like
Yeah.
that it wouldn't necessarily
At
work
least
out
until you
on that
hashed
front, but
out a lot of the basics, right? Like at least until you kind of figure out with you the DM and the player figuring out more of like how you're gonna play it. Those are those ones where you want to like work with it a little bit solo because that can take a lot of game time. Just hashing out ideas and trying to figure out what works in that situation just takes away from other gamers. So I think it could work,
right.
but you wouldn't want
I
to
totally
begin
feel
it
that.
with a
Yeah.
group.
And I feel like, and not necessarily that, I mean, we've been working out the details of the Bender class and trying to get Dobbs squared away, but I think at the very least for Dobbs, we have a good baseline to go with moving forward. So I totally feel that. But it just always brings to my attention. It's like, okay, I even kind of look at something like that, very similar to like a psionicist, right? Although psionicists, their skill sets are way more diverse than I would say mutants. Because psionicists, you can likely go down a bunch of different paths, but it all comes from the same foundation, I guess you could say. Um, but like doing stuff like that. And do you consider your psionicist a role play class?
No, because for the most part, I do. I love the way the Psionicist is in second edition. So I've primarily stuck with um, exactly what the Psionicist handbook has, with only some minor alterations to accommodate just some high point, specific mechanics. But I've primarily left the Psionicist race as is just because it is so versatile. And I think the Psionicist
Right.
race just absolutely lends itself to being a role class or a role play class because although it has a strict set of things you can do, the way you can apply and work with a lot of the psionic powers is to me some of the most versatile. Like there's things that have so many
Very much
different
so.
ways to approach it, whereas normal spells tend to kind of be one trick ponies or pretty boxed in.
A little bit pigeonholed.
I really think
Yeah.
I think psionics have so much more opportunities because of just um, the sheer uniqueness and the sheer, like you were saying, the variety of what you can do as a psionicist depending on what school you go into. Yeah, it can absolutely be crazy. But I would consider that one
Interesting.
of the closest things D&D has to a roleplay class. But I don't treat it like a roleplay class in High Point.
That's fair. That's fair. But okay, no, I was just curious on that front. But no, I very much agree. I like the idea of being able to explore the game in a different way, rather than exploring it very linearly, just being like, oh, hey, this is what I get to do. Let's just follow these, check off these boxes, do these things. But you're really getting to what I would call use the paintbrush. You're
Yeah.
going out there and painting. To me, it's the difference between paint by numbers and somebody who just stares at a blank canvas, right? no matter what you end up with at the end of the day, when you stared at a blank canvas, whether you put stick figures on it or whether you make like some beautiful realistic scenery or whether you just dump a bunch of paint on a canvas, like that is your own personal unique creation.
Right.
But paint by numbers is just putting together a puzzle piece, which is fine, and you did a good job creating it. But like even when you get like old coloring books, it's somebody else's art that you're just giving color to. And
Right.
that's a lot of the times how I feel like a lot of people treat their D&D characters. It's somebody else's art that they're just giving color to. And I think, especially in a game like this, there's so much more to be given than just the colors. Like, you can draw outside the lines. You can do so much creative stuff. You can erase the lines if you freaking feel like it, create new lines of your own. Like, just make it your own. And I know that I like the fact that there are lines for those who don't necessarily have that sort of uh internal creative juices, so they don't have to work so hard to get that stuff out, because some people just aren't like that. Some people just don't have the, you and I, we love to like describe our spells and talk about like how we want to do things, and we're talking about making combat more dynamic, just saying oh, I punch you versus, oh, I want to do an uppercut with my sword and I want to kind of like, we are like being there. We are seeing things very differently than what's put in front of us. But that's not always easy to do for everybody,
That's true.
especially if it hasn't been modeled for them. So giving them a place to start, giving them lines to color in, giving them an idea of what you can do, what things can look like, is a great place for what I would consider inspiration. But I think too often in this particular game, people take inspiration as law,
Yeah.
and they start using that inspiration and saying, "You deviated from the inspiration. You colored outside the lines. How dare you?" And I'm like, "But it looks good though.
Right. It worked.
But it was a
Like
cool
like
ass
the point is it
move
worked.
though. Right? It still decapitated the dude though. Like, just because I didn't use, you know, action number 246, doesn't mean like, I don't know. I see its value, but it's it's a lot of the time when people are so adherent, they don't want to see anything outside of it. And that's hard for me sometimes. So, I don't know. Um I really appreciate a lot of what we do here, because a lot of what we do here is we're like, hey, look at how these other people colored inside the lines and look at how we colored outside of it. Take a look at both of them and tell me what you think, right? You know, when I'm out here creating a class, when all these people are submitting their homebrew reviews, that's somebody saying, "Hey, look at me. I colored outside the lines. I made this picture look kind of like that picture, but it's different. Do you
Hmm.
like my unique, like whatever the may be, is does it do something that tickles your fancy? Like, some art speaks to some people and some art doesn't. Some people like fifth edition, some people like second edition, some people like Pathfinder, some people like D&D. Like whatever the heck it is you want to end up doing,
Yeah,
like
some people are
it's
right, some
all
people are
here for the
wrong. It's,
same
it just happens.
thing.
uh,
But I mean, like, it really is. Like, I enjoy what this game represents in my mind. And when you go to an art museum and you're looking at the art on the wall, what does that piece of art mean? Well, it doesn't mean any one thing. It means all of the things and none of the things all at the same time. It it is the meaning that you give it, right?
100%.
And so much of this game is the same way for me. It's like it is the meaning that you give it. And that's what I want to do, is I want to be able to be like, hey, this piece, like, I may not be super good at all these other pieces, but that's what I have these players for. That's what I have the rest of the people that are playing for. They bring the pieces together. I might be really good at organizing the pieces and putting it together in a place that everyone can come and look at all the collected pieces. This beautiful, people collect action figures, they collect all kinds of extra stuff, but like they do it for all different types of reasons. Like you're creating like an entire, I want to call it an ecosystem, but like just this world that you get to play, interact in, and I don't know. It it really I am not skilled at a lot of different forms of art. You know, drawing, not so much, music, not so much. Um, I'm okay at martial arts. I definitely consider that an art form.
Oh, yeah, yeah, it
But
is.
D&D is one of my favorite forms of art. And it really is because it's art of pure imagination, where you're not limited by a brush, you're not limited by your vocal cords, you're not limited by invented instruments. And now, granted, all those things have been overcome, but with this game, like it's just like all the walls are gone, and it's just like empty space. You got a holodeck to program, and it's very cool. It's to me the ultimate empty canvas
Yeah.
is my mindscape, and just being able to do a lot with that. This is why being more engaging, just talking to your players, just interacting. It's why I do it. It's a good time. So
Yeah.
no, I'm for sure here for it.
No, I like the way you put that. I like the way that you put that D&D is like its own art form because, storytelling is an art form, and being able
Oh yes, yes.
to create not just a story and a narrative, but something that's interactable is, it's one thing to paint a picture, but imagine being able to paint a picture that would change if you touched it. You know what I mean? Like a picture that would have the
Ooh,
window go dirty if you
yep.
touched it, or a door open that you touched, right? Like it's an art form that is much more expressive than just a single still of anything that you can create, right? Because it's a evolving piece of work, because you're constantly working on it based off the feedback that you get, right? It's like a
Mhm.
sculpture that never is finished. So I like the way that you put that.
And
I like the way that it's art.
yeah, and it's one of the true forms of art that is collaborative. Like most people, like when you're making a painting, like that's your painting. But this form of art is genuinely collaborative. You could make a D&D world all by yourself. It's just all you and whatever it is that you wanted in it. But then it's just an empty world. It really comes to life when you bring people into it, when you fill it with stuff, when you fill it with, you were talking about High Point and how what High Point is what it is because of the people that come to it,
Mm-hmm.
right? Zenith, the majority of the power that he gets is from the unique souls, the souls that aren't him, right? They are what add to the realm that he is governing. And so I think that's really what I try to hammer home whenever I am in either seat, the DM or the player seat, is like, how do I make this experience more collaborative? How do I make this experience more uh, of 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 an art form that we get to participate in together? You know, I think so much cool stuff can be done when that's the mindset.
Yeah. But yeah, that's a great way to put that.
Right.
I like that. I'm gonna have to ruminate more on D&D as an art form. Um, it's not like it's anything surprising. I've just never really like sat down and just like actively thought of it that way. So I'm gonna have to think about that more.
Right. Same.
But that
Same.
brings us to the third hour, just past the third hour. I got all the
Oh
topics that
wow.
I wanted to talk about out of the way.
No, that was absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, no,
I think you
that
did a
was good.
great
I'm
job.
glad that we finally got through that one because yeah, I think we as DMs can do a lot to help players feel more engaged, help them feel more in control, even if, again, the situation isn't in their control, like giving them different aspects to control before the battle, the knowledge of the battle, even being able to pre-plan things together that are only situational, but when it happens, allowing them to pull it off, even with some, tweaking of initiative or whatever. Like, just all of these different ways to make players feel less like they're reacting to the battle and more like, again, because we've said this a couple times, it's everybody's in charge of the narrative, right? Like, you're the storyteller, but everybody's the narrator. And to give the players more of that feeling, these are some of those examples that you can do to throw in your game, to give them more of a chance to feel like they're also helping that narration. It's like, it's like the same thing of like when someone does a crit and you let them explain, like, hey man, you critted and you killed them. Tell us how you did it. How you killed in the winning blow, right? And they can talk about like a decapitation. They can, these are those moments that players look forward to because they feel like they are actually part of the narration, not just waiting to be told what happened. And as a player, am very encouraged and very rewarded when I get to do that. And as a DM, I've seen it in players when you give them the reins. It's like when you have the open world and giving them the opportunity to really do anything. But when you give them the reins of narration, more than not, players will be so much more satisfied with what happens, even if the outcome isn't bad, because they feel like, again, it wasn't just a dice roll and random. Like, they put heart and soul into this decision, and they were willing. Like, when they've done all of that, when they feel like they're actually getting to do something, they're more willing to accept that loss because they did everything they could, right? Like, knowing that, especially with my players, when they know I'm going to take everything they say into account, they feel less like I just said no, and they're like, man, I gave it all my try. I thought through this puzzle and it just didn't work, right? But it doesn't come down to it was never going to work, right? It's just a dice roll. That's, I think, the difference between that defeatist mentality of, did it not work because it just didn't work, or did it not work because it just didn't work? Like, you know what I mean? There's a feeling from the players that you as a DM can help guide them towards, and you want them to feel that, darn, it didn't work, but close, not the didn't work. Okay. And we've all been there as players. We've all had those moments where you just feel like, I just don't fucking care. Nothing's working. The dice are against me. But the DM, small change in narration can change that mindset, can bring a player from feeling like how many times have you been a player and halfway through the gaming session, you're just giving up. You just don't even care about the gaming session anymore because you're convinced the gaming session's against you. You can't stop that from a player, but you can help alleviate that feeling by not focusing on the fact that it's, you missed the die roll, you missed, right? You got to make it more engaging and make it feel less like it's a black and white. You know what I mean? It's not easy, but I think that's what today's topic was really all about.
It's definitely a balance, and I think I've come away with a lot of good ideas about this. So hopefully I can honestly take some good notes from this for later, just to keep it in the back of my mind. But again, a lot of this stuff comes down to keeping it in your awareness, because I can have all kinds of great ideas, but if I don't actually think about those ideas when it's time to implement them, then what are we doing?
Exactly. And it's a good thing that you brought up notes too, because if you at home want to take any notes and you are here live and you miss anything, you can catch this episode and all of our previous episodes on YouTube at MisfitGamersStudios Live. I just realized I need to update Twitch because it only says YT is at MisfitGamersStudios and it's actually at MisfitGamersStudios Live. That is my problem. I'll have to update that this weekend. But if you are watching us on YouTube, go ahead and give a like and subscribe if you do like it. If you don't like it and you want to give us a dislike, at least give us a comment and let us know which parts that we could do better on, because we always want to get better. And a dislike is only as good as the comment that follows it. So let us know what's going on. If you're here with us in Twitch chat, we really appreciate you joining us today. We do have a Discord. KAge, if you wouldn't mind passing that into the chat real quick. But if you want to give us any topics that you'd like to hear us talk about, if you have any questions for us that you want to have us answer on stream or privately in Discord, or if you have a homebrew submission for our Monday homebrew review, join our Discord, which we're going to pop into the chat right now. And you can submit all of that. You can chat with us offline. And you can kind of just be up to date on any new topics or updates that we're going to have for the streams a little bit earlier instead of having to wait for us to go live. If you want to see us again, if you're new here, you can catch us every Monday and Friday. Mondays at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, where we do our official homebrew review day, where we take usually user submitted item or weapon or what spell, what have you, something homebrewed from a viewer, and we kind of break it down, give our first initial reactions, some tips and tricks on what we might do with it. Not necessarily saying what you could do to be better, but we just like to talk about what we might do with it in our setting, and then we give it a rating based on how much we want to use it in our setting. Again, not necessarily a rating of how much we think it's good, it's just more of how good it is for us. And then on Fridays, 7:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time is when we start our normal deep dive discussions, where we take a topic and we just dive into it for 2, 3, 4 hours. But again, we thank you for joining us if you have, and if you come back, join us live. We'd love to hear you in chat, and we'd love to see you in the Discord. Let us know what you want us to talk about. We're always here for you and for the audience. That's what this is all about, is audience interaction. But that's going to be our Friday stream. I hope you guys had a great week. I hope you have a great weekend coming up, and we will see you on Monday.
Sounds good. Deuces, my friends.